just arrived at Marvel and started beating up his younger brother Thor. Chapter 1. Asgard. Heavenly Palace. The Divine Realm, Asgard. Leon Odinson felt that if idleness could be canonized as a divine duty, he would undoubtedly be the most devout follower within the Nine Realms. At this moment, he lay on a lounge chair on the terrace of a secluded garden on the east side of the Heavenly Palace, in a posture completely devoid of majesty. This was his carefully chosen treasure spot. The angle of the sun was just right, allowing him to enjoy the radiance refracted from the golden palace without being scorched by the midday sun. Of course, for the sun god, being scorched was a false proposition to begin with. That's right, his divine position was sun god, personally bestowed by Odin. Don't ask why the sun god is male, isn't Sol a goddess? But none of that matters. In short, if I say it is, then it is. He closed his eyes, enjoying the sun's energy permeating every cell like warm water. He reveled in this comfort, yet his brow was slightly furrowed. Boom! A tremendous roar from the distant training grounds made the entire terrace tremble. Without opening his eyes, Leon knew it was his good younger brother making a ruckus again. Indeed, it was Thor, whose mind contained nothing but muscles and his hammer. At this moment, he was once again testing the power of his precious hammer on the poor training dummies. Can't he be quiet for just one day? Leon sighed helplessly. He casually retrieved a bunch of purple grapes from a nearby ice bucket. These rare delicacies from Xandar, each containing a faint trace of universe energy, were his favorite snack in the Nine Realms. He lazily raised his hand, and a grape automatically detached, floating to his mouth. He opened his mouth to catch it, and the juice burst forth, a sweet flavor with a hint of warmth. He was a transmigrator. In his previous life, he was just an ordinary earthling. An accident led to his rebirth, directly into the womb of Queen Frigga, becoming a pure-blooded Norse god, Odin's second child. When he was born, his sealed older sister had already been imprisoned by their father, Odin, long before. That's right, it was Hela, the goddess of death. Their parents had never mentioned Hela's existence to them, but Leon, relying on his memories from his previous life, knew all about it. He also knew that this world, which appeared to be the cinematic universe, actually incorporated many other elements, though he couldn't fully determine what they were yet. Brother Leon, it seems your photosynthesis has been disturbed again. A teasing voice came from behind him, accompanied by slight energy fluctuations. Leon didn't even lift an eyelid. He simply summoned another grape. Loki, the god of mischief. Loki, if you're here to show off your new illusions, I suggest you go find Thor. Leon's voice was languid. He's easier to fool, and seeing two of you, he might even be happier, because then there would be two people to listen to him boast about his heroic deeds. Loki, dressed in a green robe, appeared silently on the terrace. He conjured an identical lounge chair and quietly lay down beside Leon, conjuring an identical glass of iced fruit wine in his hand. How boring, brother, Loki swirled his wine glass. I thought you'd be interested in my new magic. I just successfully made the ravens on Father's throne sneeze for several hours straight. Oh. Then Father must be very pleased. Leon's tone was unperturbed. After all, those two old birds have been squawking in his ear for thousands of years. It's rare for him to have some peace and quiet. Loki's mouth twitched. He found that talking to his older brother always left him with a sense of powerlessness, like punching cotton. He was always so calm, so lazy, as if the sky falling wouldn't make him move from his lounge chair. Seriously, are you just going to lie here until Ragnarok? Loki couldn't help but ask. Father has been worried about the future of the Nine Realms lately, and Thor is constantly thinking about war. Can't you show a little princely responsibility? Responsibility. Leon finally opened his eyes, golden pupils shimmering in the sunlight. He glanced at Loki. Are you sure, Loki? You weren't even born when I was fighting in the Nine Realms. And now, aren't there Father and you too? He yawned, turned over, and continued to rest with his eyes closed. Don't worry, Loki. When the sky falls, the tall ones will hold it up, and I, coincidentally, am the shortest among us three brothers. Loki. He felt he must be insane to try to discuss responsibility with a god who considered living a life of leisure as his ultimate pursuit. And how dare you say, shortest? A height of 198 centimeters. Can that be called short? Heaven knows, among the three brothers, only he, Loki, was the shortest. That truly was a hellish joke. Can you believe that a height of 194 centimeters is the shortest? Just then, an Asgardian guard in golden armor rushed onto the terrace and knelt on one knee. Your Highness Leon, Your Highness Loki. The guard's voice was urgent. King Odin summons you. Please proceed to the royal great hall immediately. A flicker of light, barely perceptible, crossed Loki's eyes. He elegantly rose, straightened his robes, and the smile on his lips became meaningful. Leon, on the other hand, let out a disgruntled protest, then slowly sat up from the lounge chair, stretched, and his bones cracked with a series of pops. This sight made Loki's mouth twitch slightly, as if recalling some unpleasant memory. As the eldest brother who could easily handle Thor with one hand, Leon had always enjoyed bullying the two of them since childhood. These were all memories Loki found unbearable. Got it. Leon waved his hand casually. Tell father I'll change my clothes and be right there. Tell him not to rush, the sky won't fall anyway. The guard acknowledged the order and departed. Loki took a deep breath, no longer dwelling on those painful memories, but instead looked at Leon's leisurely pace and couldn't help but shake his head. Can't you be a little more enthusiastic? It might be a great thing. A great thing. Leon raised an eyebrow. For me, being able to take a quiet nap is a great thing. He shrugged, and his figure began to dissipate into thin air, like water vapor in the sunlight. Loki looked at the empty lounge chair, paused for a moment, then shook his head with a bitter smile. His elder brother, despite his claims of laziness, possessed an unfathomable and mysterious power. At least this precise control over space and light energy made even him, the god of mischief, feel inferior. The Great Hall. Inside the magnificent hall, the atmosphere was heavy. Odin, king of the gods. Odin, the Allfather, sat upon the high throne, his single eye gleaming with wisdom, the eternal spear in his hand exuding a faint aura of power. Thor stood beside the throne, Mjolnir in hand, his face filled with eager battlelust. Thor, the thunder god. Loki, meanwhile, stood on the other side, his expression elegant, but his eyes glinting with calculation. Soon, Leon's figure, like converging light, instantly appeared in the center of the great hall. He had changed into simple golden casual clothes, still looking as if he hadn't quite woken up. Father, what is it that you need me for? Leon yawned, casually leaning against a pillar. I haven't taken action in a long time. Has the situation escalated to the point where even I must intervene? Odin's single eye swept over him, his authoritative voice echoing through the hall. Leon, shed your indolence. The balance of the 9 realms is being broken. Leon finally showed some interest. Oh, are those frost giants in Jotunheim restless again? Worse than that, Odin said gravely. According to Heimdall's observations, dark energy is eroding the roots of the world tree, and ominous signs have appeared in all the realms. And just now, a patrol sent to Vanaheim lost contact. Vanaheim. Thor immediately stepped forward, his expression excited. Father, let me go. I guarantee I'll smash those who dare to provoke Asgard into pulp. Loki chuckled softly. Brother, can your mind hold anything besides battle? We don't even know who the enemy is. That's still better than you, who only hides behind others to plot schemes. Thor glared at him. Enough. Odin's voice, filled with unquestionable authority, stopped his two sons bickering. His gaze finally settled on Leon, who was leaning against the pillar, almost asleep. Leon, what do you think of this matter? Leon opened his eyes and scanned the holographic star map of the Great Hall, where the light representing Vanaheim flickered weakly. He pondered for a moment, then said lazily. What is there to think? Send someone to check it out, and you'll know. But I suggest not sending Thor, I'm afraid he'll just tear Vanaheim apart. Thor. Hey. Odin ignored Thor's protest and continued to ask, then who do you think should go? Leon shrugged. Anyone can go, as long as it's not me. I still have to catch up on sleep this afternoon. Just then, the doors of the Great Hall were violently pushed open, and a wounded Asgardian warrior stumbled in, his armor covered in ice and scorch marks. Allfather. It's the frost giants. The warrior cried hoarsely. They attacked our outpost. Laufey himself led the team. The Great Hall instantly fell silent. Thor's eyes immediately blazed with fury. Laufey. How dare he? Odin's single eye narrowed, the eternal spear glowed, and the temperature of the entire great hall seemed to drop a few degrees. Only Leon remained leaning against the pillar, even offering an interested comment. It seems those frost giants are truly tired of living. Father. Thor knelt on one knee, his voice like thunder. Please allow me to go to war. I will lead Asgard's most elite warriors, flatten Jotunheim, and bring Laufey's head back to you. I'll go too. Loki stepped forward, a cold glint in his eyes. It's a good chance to test my new magic. Odin remained silent, seemingly weighing the pros and cons. Leon looked at his two younger brothers, who seemed eager to rush out and fight immediately, and sighed helplessly. He slowly walked forward and, to everyone's surprise, directly took a bottle of mead from a guard's hand and tilted his head back to drink. All right, stop bickering. Leon's voice quieted the entire great hall. He shook the bottle in his hand and looked at Odin. Father, leave this matter to me. A flicker of surprise crossed Odin's single eye. You. Thor and Loki both turned to look at him, their faces filled with disbelief. Aren't you going to sleep? Loki couldn't help but ask. Leon rolled his eyes. Otherwise, what? Wait for them to reach Asgard. He casually tossed the empty wine bottle to Thor, then stretched. You all stay here, don't go anywhere. Leon's tone was calm, yet carried a commanding air. Especially you, Thor. If you dare to sneak out, I'll melt that hammer of yours and forge you a wine cup. Thor was startled and instinctively hugged Mjolnir tightly. Leon no longer paid attention to the shocked expressions of the others. His body began to emit a faint golden light, like a miniature sun. I'll be back soon. Before his words faded, he slowly floated up, then, swoosh. By the time everyone reacted, his figure had transformed into a brilliant pillar of light, shooting through the dome of the great hall and disappearing into the sky. Leaving behind a bewildered Thor and Loki, and a pensive Odin. Jotunheim, the realm of the frost giants. Eternal cold winds howled, sweeping up ice and snow across the sky. Glaciers, like ferocious fangs, pierced the gloomy sky. Frost giant King Laufey sat upon his throne, coldly observing the army gathered below. Frost giant Laufey. Tens of thousands of frost giant warriors, armed with ice blades and battle axes, stood in neat formation, their murderous aura lowering the temperature of the ice plane even further. The Asgardians are already vulnerable. Laufey's voice was grating. Odin is old, and his sons are nothing but cowards. Today, we shall bring the 9 realms back under the shroud of winter. Roar. The frost giants let out earth-shattering roars, the sound waves making the glaciers tremble. Just then, the gloomy sky suddenly brightened. At first, it was just a speck of golden light, but in an instant, that light illuminated all of Jotunheim like the sun. What is that? Laufey suddenly stood up, squinting as he looked towards the sky. A golden figure floated high above, clad in golden armor, a cape gently fluttering behind him. The light and heat emanating from him began to melt this world of ice and snow. Sun god Leon. Water droplets fell from the surface of the glaciers, and the accumulated snow on the ground turned into steam. The frost giants instinctively felt a wave of discomfort and panic. Leon spread his arms, like a god looking down upon an army of ants below. He did not speak, but slowly raised his right hand. With his movement, the temperature of all Jotunheim began to rise sharply at a terrifying speed. The glaciers melted at a visible rate, turning into raging floods. The ice armor, which the frost giants prided themselves on, began to vaporize, their skin sizzling as it was scorched. No. This is impossible. Laufey watched all this in horror, trying to gather the power of ice to resist, but that power was no match for the absolute light and heat. The throne collapsed in the flood, and the army wailed in the steam. Leon remained expressionless. He simply snapped his fingers gently. In an instant, the light intensified, and Jotunheim seemed to have been thrown into the core of a star. When the light dissipated, the former world of ice and snow had become a vast ocean, with only a few of the highest mountain peaks stubbornly emerging from the water. The surviving frost giants huddled miserably on the mountaintops, staring in terror at the godlike figure in the sky. Leon slowly descended before Laufey, his golden pupils devoid of any emotion. My brothers wanted to flatten this place, his voice echoed in the steaming air. But I am more merciful. He extended a finger, on which immense energy condensed. Now, take your people and crawl back into your caves. if I ever see any frost giant step out of Jotunheim again. Leon smiled faintly, though his smile was very cold. I will turn this place into the Nine Realms' largest hot spring. With that, he no longer paid attention to Laufey, who was scared out of his wits, turned into a golden light, and instantly vanished, leaving behind a realm of frost giants trembling in warm water. Heavenly Palace, Valhalla. Less than 5 minutes had passed since Leon left. Thor and Loki were still arguing about whether Leon could defeat Laufey. He definitely can. He's just a lazy bum, I bet he'll be back in 5 minutes at most. Just then, a golden light descended from the sky, and Leon's figure reappeared in the center of the Great Hall, holding a steaming hot spring egg. Done, he said, taking a bite of the hot spring egg, his words muffled. The hot spring water there is good, so I boiled an egg while I was at it. Thor, Loki, Odin. Valhalla fell into a long silence. After the silence, Thor burst into cheers. He rushed forward, slapping Leon heavily on the shoulder. I knew it. Leon. You are my strongest brother. Thor roared excitedly, Mjolnir humming in his hand, as if also cheering for Leon's victory. Easy, Thor. Leon dodged his bear hug with a look of distaste, protecting the hot spring egg in his hand. This is a unique, Laufey's Wrath, brand hot spring egg from the Nine Realms, you can't afford to spill it. Loki walked forward elegantly, his eyes complex. He looked at Leon, a subtle smile playing on his lips. Congratulations, brother. It seems your strength has improved considerably, even Laufey is no match for you. His words, seemingly praise, were like an invisible needle, quietly pricking Thor's proud heart. Sure enough, the smile on Thor's face stiffened slightly. He glanced at Leon, then at Mjolnir in his own hand, a hint of unwillingness flashing in his eyes. As Odin's son, he had always lived under the dazzling halo of his elder brother Leon. The throne naturally belonged to Leon, and he had no objection to this, but he longed to prove himself. He longed to one day become Leon's most valiant general, not just a younger brother who only followed behind to clean up messes. He wanted to prove to his father that he was not an expendable backup. Leon was too lazy to bother with the undercurrents between his two brothers. He finished the hot spring egg in a few bites, stretched comfortably, then slowly sauntered over to Odin's throne. Father, the trouble is solved, his tone was flat. Those ice lumps promise not to step out of Jotunheim for a few hundred years. Now, can I go back to sleep? Odin's single eye gazed deeply at him. This son always eluded his understanding. His power seemed limitless, yet his demeanor was too lazy for a god. Go, Odin's voice carried a hint of weariness. But Thor, Loki, you stay. Leon smiled faintly, instantly feeling as if a great burden had been lifted. His figure flickered, turning into golden particles once more and vanishing, as if he had never appeared. Inside the great hall, the atmosphere became subtle once again. Odin looked at Thor and said in a deep voice, Thor, do you see? True strength is not born of recklessness and anger, but from absolute control over power. I understand, father, Thor replied, lowering his head, but the fingers tightly gripping Mjolnir's handle betrayed his displeasure. He didn't understand. He only saw Leon solving the problem with greater power and a more overbearing method. In his view, this was not control, but a stronger form of violence. He craved that power, and he envied that power. Loki stood by, taking in Thor's expression, the smile on his lips deepening. Late that night, Thor paced restlessly in his chambers. Leon's effortless victory weighed on his heart like a boulder. He swung Mjolnir again and again, lightning raging within the palace, yet unable to dispel the anxiety in his heart. Still bothered by the day's battle, brother. Loki appeared silently behind him, holding 2 cups of mead. Don't bother me, Loki. Thor roared without turning his head. Oh. It seems even Thunder God Thor has moments of helplessness. Loki handed him a cup of wine, his tone carrying just the right amount of sympathy. I can understand how you feel. Brother Leon is indeed too powerful, so powerful that it makes us younger brothers seem somewhat redundant. These words struck a raw nerve in Thor. He spun around abruptly, snatched the wine cup, and drained it. I don't feel helpless. He insisted, forcing the words out. I just think Laufey was defeated too easily. We didn't even have a real battle. Of course, Loki smiled and nodded, playing along with his words. Brother Leon directly turned Jotunheim into a sauna, and Laufey didn't even put up a decent fight. Is this a war? This is simply a unilateral carnage. The dignity of Asgard was not displayed in the battle. Exactly. Thor exclaimed, as if he had found a kindred spirit, slamming his fist on the table. I should have led the warriors to crush them on the battlefield. To make them tremble beneath Mjolnir. Not like this, listening to Leon's stories about hot spring eggs. So. Loki leaned in closer, his voice dropping even lower, laced with temptation. Don't you want to know the true strength of the frost giants? Don't you want to prove that even without Leon, you, thunder god Thor, can still guard the glory of Asgard? Thor's breathing grew heavy, and the fighting spirit in his eyes was rekindled. What are you trying to say, Loki? Loki smiled, knowing his plan had succeeded. I heard that although Laufey was defeated, he did not directly surrender, and even a few frost giant leaders are dissatisfied with Brother Leon's actions and are secretly gathering. Father and Leon both believe the crisis is over, which is our best chance to prove ourselves. He paused, watching Thor's emotions, which he had completely stirred up, then threw out the final bait. Think about it, brother. When we solve the problem and bring those unyielding leaders back to the heavenly palace, what kind of look will everyone, including Father and Leon, give you? The image instantly appeared in Thor's mind. He stood in the center of Valhalla, receiving universal reverence, even Leon casting an approving glance his way. Good. He slammed the wine cup to the ground, shattering it instantly. That's what we'll do. We'll find Sif and the Warriors 3, and we'll set off tonight. This is the spirit befitting Asgard's future general. Loki bowed elegantly, a triumphant glee deep in his eyes. He knew he had succeeded. Thor, this chess piece, had landed firmly in the position he desired. And all of this was just the first step of his plan. Night fell. In Leon's secluded garden, the moonlight was like water. He lay on a lounge chair, seemingly in a deep sleep, but his eyelashes trembled slightly in the moonlight. His superhuman hearing, or rather, his perception of light and energy as the sun god, allowed him to easily detect every unusual energy fluctuation within the heavenly palace. For instance, the muffled plotting in Thor's chambers, filled with suppressed excitement and fury. Alas, Leon sighed inwardly. Truly a group of troublesome younger brothers. He had long seen through Loki's little tricks and knew that Thor's pathetic self-esteem was at play. He even understood that Odin had tacitly allowed all of this to happen. A meticulously designed farce. Leon found it somewhat amusing. Odin wanted to use this opportunity to temper Thor's arrogance, to make him understand the responsibilities a true prince must bear. Loki, on the other hand, wanted to seize the chance to kick Thor, his bothersome brother, out of the picture, paving the way for his own future position. And Thor, he simply wanted to prove to his father that he wasn't useless. Everyone had their own little schemes, and everyone thought they were the player. Boring. Leon turned over, deciding not to bother with this mess. As long as they didn't cause too much trouble and didn't actually dismantle Asgard, he was too lazy to interfere. After all, Thor was about to go to Earth according to the plot. At that time, Odin would definitely send him to Earth to keep an eye on his foolish brother. So he might as well just wait for the outcome. Soon, he sensed Thor and Loki, along with Sif and the Warriors 3, stealthily sneaking towards the Bifrost Bridge. Sif. He conjured several plates of melon seeds and watched with relish. Consider it a free play. With a thought, a faint, imperceptible golden light flew from his hand, silently attaching itself to Thor's cape. What followed played out almost exactly according to the movie's script. Thor and his companions arrived at Jotunheim via the Bifrost Bridge, and their appearance immediately enraged the frost giants, who were already simmering with anger. A chaotic battle erupted. Though Thor was brave, he quickly found himself in danger under the siege of Laufey and the entire frost giant army. At the critical moment, Odin descended, riding the divine steed Sleipnir, forcibly ended the battle, and brought his troublesome sons back to Asgard. Inside Valhalla, the atmosphere was icy. Odin's wrath was like an erupting volcano. He held the eternal spear, pointing it at Thor, who was kneeling on the ground. You are arrogant, reckless, and conceited. You have failed my expectations. You are not worthy of this divine hammer. You are not worthy of being an Asgardian warrior. Odin's voice echoed through the empty hall, every word heavily striking Thor's heart. He stripped Thor of his divine power, threw Mjolnir into the distance, accompanied by a curse. Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. Finally, with a wave of his hand, a rainbow pillar of light engulfed the despairing Thor. Father! Loki feigned a cry, but his eyes gleamed with triumph. Odin ignored him, merely sitting wearily on the throne, as if he had aged hundreds of years in an instant. Soon, everyone left the great hall. So, the farce is over. Leon's figure appeared silently beside the throne, holding a bunch of freshly picked grapes. Odin turned his head, his eyes filled with complex emotions. You knew all along, didn't you? Knew Loki was fanning the flames, or knew you were deliberately acting? Leon tossed a grape into his mouth, speaking casually. Odin fell silent. Father, I actually don't quite agree with this approach. Leon shook his head. Though Thor is impulsive, it's not very serious. You are risking the safety of a realm to teach him a lesson. He must learn humility. Odin's voice trembled. How can a brute who only knows war become your future right-hand man? What about Loki? Leon asked again. Are you just letting him scheme against his own brother like this? Can't you see the ambition in his eyes? Loki, Odin's tone grew even more weary. He just needs more attention. When Thor returns, everything will be fine. Naive. Leon commented unceremoniously. He walked to the center of the great hall, looking at the lingering energy afterglow of the Bifrost Bridge. Forget it, I'm too lazy to bother with these messes. Leon's tone was calm. As the sun god, his physical prowess was already extraordinary, far surpassing Thor's strength. Even without using divine power, his physical strength alone was enough to crush most beings in the Nine Realms. Moreover, he was proficient in all of Asgard's magic, his mastery even exceeding Loki's. It was just that he was too lazy to use it. However, since you've thrown Thor to earth, I also happen to want to go there to see. Odin's single eye lit up. He was still wondering how to bring it up, but Leon had proposed it first. Leon, you want to go to Earth? Why not? Leon raised an eyebrow. As the future king of Asgard, isn't it normal to familiarize myself with one of the most special of the Nine Realms? Besides, Sorcerer Ancient One is also there, and I haven't seen her in a long time. Leon, of course, knew Ancient One, simply because Odin had taken him to Kamar Taj several times to discuss the mysteries of the universe with the Sorcerer Supreme. Odin slowly nodded, his eyes showing relief and expectation. You are right, Leon. Earth is indeed special, and Thor, he will be your bravest general in the future. But he still needs tempering now. Go, help me watch over him, guide him, and make him understand what true responsibility is. You want me to be his bodyguard? Leon sighed. All right, consider it a vacation, and a chance to watch a show. I hear Earth's yellow sun is quite special, it should be good for my skin. His tone was relaxed, but Odin could see his calm demeanor, as if everything was under control. He knew Leon understood everything. He wasn't going to clean up a mess, but to watch a show, and incidentally ensure the show didn't fail. Go. Odin finally nodded slowly. With Leon there, perhaps, everything really wouldn't spiral out of control. Thanks, Father King. Leon snapped his fingers, his figure once again transforming into particles of light. Oh, right. His voice came before he completely vanished. Remember to watch over my garden for me. If anyone dares to steal my grapes, I'll let them taste a solar flare. Odin. Looking at the empty hall, the All-Father shook his head helplessly. His 3 sons, each one more troublesome than the last. But for some reason, his heart felt an unprecedented sense of peace. Nothing else, just because the eldest, Leon, though appearing lazy and gentle, was not actually so. He had been a warmonger since childhood. 2,000 years ago, he, like his sister, advocated for outward expansion, striving to rule the entire universe, to plant Asgard's banner in every corner. All enemies that appeared were utterly annihilated by him. Every time he acted, nothing was left in his wake, not a blade of grass, not a chicken or dog. His catchphrase was also quite peculiar. The sun will shine equally on every devout believer. Your words make the sun happy, but the sun does not like your actions. This statement was somewhat arrogant, so Odin felt that while Leon's current personality was gentle, it wasn't due to weakness, but rather good upbringing. Deep down, he didn't truly regard others as important, believing he could control everything. After this, the sun god's reputation spread wildly throughout the universe, some even called him the god of death instead of the sun god. This level of cruelty made even him, a king who had fought for many years, frown deeply. Ultimately, Odin himself sought out Leon for a talk, and in the end, he found it uninteresting, gradually becoming as he is now. Thinking of these things, Odin sighed. Besides all this, Leon was also the first prince of Asgard, of noble status. It seemed the people of Earth were likely in for a tough time. However, with Leon, his most trusted son, there, he didn't think there would be any major trouble. He just hoped Thor wouldn't disgrace the Asgardians. Bifrost Bridge. The dazzling, colorful stream of the Bifrost Bridge pulsed, connecting Asgard with the starry sea of the Nine Realms. The gatekeeper, Heimdall, clad in golden heavy armor and holding his guardian sword, stood like a statue in the center of the high platform. Heimdall. His eyes could pierce through the Nine Realms, discerning all things, no secret could escape his gaze. Your Highness Leon. In front of him, Leon's figure, bathed in golden light, strolled leisurely from the direction of the heavenly palace. Heimdall's millennia unchanging expression finally shifted. He bowed slightly, his voice steady. Leon walked up to him, casually leaning against the control panel, his gaze directed towards the splendid universe outside the observatory. Heimdall, long time no see. How are your eyes recently? Have you seen any interesting gossip? Heimdall's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. This great prince was still the same as ever. He possessed power enough to make the entire Nine Realms tremble, yet he always acted like a newly awakened playboy. The Nine Realms are peaceful, Your Highness, Heimdall replied respectfully. Leon was one of the few people he was willing to respect, not only because of his immense strength but also because of his ambition. He naturally knew the purpose of Leon's trip. The will of the god King Odin had already been conveyed to his heart. But he was more curious as to what kind of change could make this sleeping sun god step out of Asgard again. Could it be that he was bored again? A chill flashed through Heimdall's heart. He still clearly remembered that 2,000 years ago, every time Your Highness Leon felt bored, some unlucky civilization in the universe would be erased from the star charts by him. At that time, he was not the gentle sun god he was now, but the god of death who struck fear into the Nine Realms. Peaceful. Leon chuckled lightly, turning his head. How is it that I feel my foolish brother is causing a lot of trouble for Earth? Heimdall fell silent. He had, of course, seen Thor's disheveled state in Midgard, and he had also seen Mjolnir being gawked at by mortals. The God King has his own arrangements, he could only reply. Leon shrugged, no longer teasing the fellow. All right, I'm not joking with you anymore. Send me to Midgard, father wants me to be Thor's babysitter. His tone was somewhat reluctant, but his eyes sparkled with anticipation. He was finally going to Earth. He had waited too long for this day. Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, these characters that only existed on screen in his previous life, he would soon see them with his own eyes. This was much more interesting than watching Loki and Thor perform their brotherly feud in Asgard. As you command, Your Highness. Heimdall inserted the guardian sword into the core of the control panel. Buzz. The observatory began to operate, the massive annular device rotating, gathering energy that tore through space. Your Highness, your weapon. Heimdall reminded him. Leon patted his waist, where it was empty. He smiled. Don't worry, Surtur, it's very well behaved, it won't run off. As soon as his voice fell, the space at his waist subtly twisted, and an ancient and ornate golden longsword appeared faintly, with scorching energy flowing along its blade. The sun god's sword, Surtur. A divine artifact forged for him by the top craftsman of Asgard using the core of a dying star. Heimdall said no more. He knew that when Your Highness Leon summoned this sword, it meant he was no longer the lazy prince, but the true sun god. Open the Bifrost Bridge. With Heimdall's command, a multicolored torrent of energy burst forth, instantly piercing through the universe and accurately shooting towards distant Midgard. Leon's figure was swallowed by the beam of light, disappearing into the brilliant radiance. Heimdall stood in place, his eyes fixed on the gradually dissipating light beam, his heart unable to calm for a long time. Hopefully, the people of Midgard can withstand this prince's vacation. U.S. New Mexico. On the endless desert, the scorching sun baked the cracked earth. Boom. A sudden loud noise came from the sky, as if something had torn through the atmosphere. Immediately after, a seven-colored pillar of light descended from the sky, imprinting a huge runic pattern on the ground. As the light dissipated, Leon's figure appeared in the center of the desert. He looked up at the sun in the sky and took a deep breath of the dry air. It's really different from Asgard's. He could feel that the energy of this star was more active. It was like a strong liquor with popping candy added, though not high in energy level, it was full of vitality. Not bad. Leon nodded with satisfaction, his mood pleasant. He observed the surrounding environment. Desolate, dilapidated, lifeless. That guy Thor being thrown into a place like this is what he deserves. Leon shook his head helplessly. Just then, several black SUVs kicked up a sky full of dust, sped from a distance, and quickly surrounded him. The car doors opened, and a dozen men in black suits and sunglasses rushed out, their firearms uniformly pointed at him. Leading them was a middle-aged man with a worrying hairline but an unusually friendly smile. Leon recognized him at a glance. Phil Coulson. SHIELD. Level 8 agent, Captain America's #1 fan, and future victim of Loki's scepter. Coulson pushed up his sunglasses, a professional smile on his face, and slowly stepped forward. Good afternoon, sir. I am Agent Phil Coulson of the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division. His voice was gentle, but his eyes subtly scrutinized Leon. This man was very strange. Coulson quickly made a judgment in his mind. He wasn't a muscular brute like Thor, nor did he have that aggressive aura. He just stood there quietly, like a nobleman who had wandered onto a film set, his elegant demeanor clashing with the surrounding desert. But the nonchalance he exuded, that calm as if he regarded everything as insignificant, made Coulson feel more unnerved than even the Hulk. What division? Leon raised an eyebrow, feigning confusion. What's that? Some kind of insurance company. Your sales tactics are quite unique. Coulson's smile stiffened. An insurance company. The agents behind him couldn't help but twitch their lips. Was this guy genuinely ignorant or just playing dumb? Sir, we are affiliated with the Strategic Homeland Intervention, Enforcement and Logistics Division, Coulson patiently explained. We are responsible for handling unconventional events. For example, situations like you suddenly falling from the sky. Oh, Leon nodded in sudden comprehension. So, you're the government's secret police. Coulson. He felt his communication skills were being challenged. Talking to this guy was more exhausting than negotiating with Tony Stark. Sir, we mean no harm. Coulson took a deep breath, deciding to get straight to the point. We want to know, who are you? Where are you from? And what is your relationship with the Mr. Thor who claimed to be here before? Leon looked at him, his golden pupils appearing exceptionally bright in the sunlight. Too many questions, Agent Coulson, he said with a smile. Let me give you a friendly reminder. How about you put down your toys first? I like your attitude, but having those things pointed at me makes me very uncomfortable. When I'm in a bad mood, I don't even know what might happen. Leon's smile was benign, yet it gave Coulson a strange feeling. With his many years of experience dealing with such incidents, he could sense that this man was definitely not simple. Thinking of this, Coulson glanced at the agents behind him, signaling them not to act rashly for now. But there were always one or two overly nervous youngsters. A young agent's finger trembled slightly, staring intently at Leon. He had just analyzed the energy readings generated when the Bifrost bridge descended through his tactical goggles. The values had already far exceeded their known range. This man was definitely on the same level as the Hulk, or even a more dangerous entity. In his fear, his finger unconsciously tightened on the trigger. Bang! A gunshot broke the silence of the desert. A specially made armor-piercing bullet, with a shriek that tore through the air, shot directly towards Leon's brow. Coulson's face instantly turned pale. Who did that? A spy. Don't shoot. But it was already too late. Time seemed to slow down at this moment. Everyone clearly saw that the bullet, capable of piercing tank armor, eerily stopped a few centimeters from Leon's forehead. It was as if it had hit an invisible wall. The warhead twisted and deformed under the intense kinetic energy but could not advance another inch. Then, under everyone's horrified gaze, Leon extended two fingers and nonchalantly pinched the deformed warhead between them. I told you, I don't like people pointing toys at me. Leon still wore a gentle smile, but a cold glint flashed in his pupils. He waved his hand lightly. Poof! There was no whistling, no sound of air being torn. The warhead instantly vanished, reappearing to have already pierced the eyebrow of the agent who fired the shot. The agent's body stiffened abruptly, his sunglasses slipped, revealing a pair of terrified and bewildered eyes. There was only a tiny bullet hole on his forehead, with no blood flowing out. The surrounding tissue had been instantly melted by the high temperature. He didn't even have time to let out a scream before he fell straight backward. The thud echoed particularly harshly in the silent desert. The scene fell silent. Coulson swallowed with difficulty, cold sweat trickling down his temples. He knew they had provoked someone who absolutely should not be provoked. This man's terror far surpassed that of the Hulk. Hulk was merely violent, but this man killed in the blink of an eye, which was more frightening than mere rage. Now, can we have a proper talk? Leon's voice remained gentle, but to the shield agents, it sounded chilling. He surveyed the rows of stiff agents and the dark muzzles of their guns, then suddenly chuckled softly. Your attacks are like pouting. Very cute, but please stop. Before he finished speaking, a light emanated from him. It wasn't an energy shock, nor mental oppression, but an energy barrier. Crack, crack. All the firearms in the agent's hands seemed unable to withstand some kind of immense pressure. Barrels twisted, parts flew off, and within seconds, they turned into piles of scrap metal. God. Coulson stared blankly at the handgun in his hand, now just a grip, his mind a blank. What kind of monster was he? Now, it's my turn to ask questions. Leon walked up to Coulson, looking down at him. Where is my foolish brother now? Coulson felt as if his heart was being squeezed, each beat feeling like his last. He swore that even when facing the out-of-control green giant, he had never felt his life so fragile as he did now. The man in front of him still wore a gentle smile, as if everything that had just happened was merely a performance. Coulson's mind raced, assessing the situation. Resist. Pointless. Run. Don't even think about it. He had no doubt that with just a thought from the other party, he and the remaining agents would follow in the footsteps of that young man. He took a deep breath, forced himself to calm down, and offered a smile that he hoped appeared as sincere as possible. Sir, are you referring to the muscular man who also fell from the sky and claims to be Thor? Coulson carefully chose his words, trying to glean more information from the other's reaction. His only mission now was to stabilize this guy, buying Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. a little more time to react. Leon looked at Coulson's face, which expressed, I'm very professional but currently panicking, and found it somewhat amusing. They always showed such interesting struggles when faced with incomprehensible power. Muscular man. Leon repeated the phrase, the smile at the corner of his mouth deepening. That's a fitting description. After all, besides muscles, there's probably only a hammer in his head. Yes, he's the one I'm looking for. Hearing Leon confirm, Coulson breathed a slight sigh of relief. At least the other party's goal was clear, and he wasn't here to destroy the world. He immediately pulled a tablet from his pocket and swiped his fingers across it rapidly. According to our tracking, Mr. Thor is currently in a town 8 kilometers away. The tablet displayed a blinking red dot, marking the town where Thor had created a large crater. He seems to be in a pet store, trying to buy a horse. Leon. The smile on his face stiffened. Buy a horse. Was Thor serious? Did he think the Bifrost Bridge was like a shared bicycle, where he could come and go as he pleased? Leon was somewhat speechless about his own brother. He could imagine Thor walking into a pet store and shouting at the owner, "Give me a horse that can return to Asgard." Though it sounded ridiculous, it was indeed something Thor would do. Coulson keenly caught the subtle change in Leon's expression and had a guess. It seemed the relationship between these two brothers wasn't as harmonious as he had imagined. This was a point that could be exploited. Sir, if you need, we can immediately send a car to take you there. Coulson quickly seized the opportunity, showing a cooperative stance. Our purpose is to maintain world peace and assist special international friends like you and Mr. Thor. Leon glanced at him, a hint of amusement flashing in his pupils. This guy was quite good at seizing opportunities. What a pity, though, you're just a village chief in the beginner's village. No need. Leon waved his hand, declining Coulson's request. He didn't want to slowly bump along the sandy ground in a car. That would be too undignified for him, the sun god, and too much of a waste of his vacation time. You all stay here. Leon's tone was flat. Remember, don't follow me, and don't try to monitor me with your little satellites. He paused, a gentle smile returning to his face, but what he said next slightly surprised Coulson. I like a quiet vacation. I don't want flies buzzing in my ear. With that, Leon no longer paid attention to the pale-faced group. His body began to emit a faint golden light. Oh, right. Just as his figure was about to dissipate, he seemed to remember something else, turning back to look at the pile of scrap metal and the puddle of human ashes. When you clean up the scene, remember to send the bill to Thor. Tell him it's his brother's mess. Before he finished speaking, his figure had already transformed into a pillar of light, soaring into the sky and instantly disappearing into the clear blue horizon. Leaving behind a group of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, disoriented in the desert wind. Coulson stared blankly at the sky, taking a long time to come back to his senses. He wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and picked up his defunct walkie-talkie, calling headquarters. Calling headquarters. This is Coulson. Yes, officer. We've encountered another one. No, much more powerful than Thor. Yes, he's gone to find Thor. Also, officer, we might need a new team member, as well as a huge amount for compensation and vehicle repair costs. New Mexico. Puente Antiguo town. Thor stood at the entrance of a pet store, looking utterly defeated. Just moments ago, he had tried to buy a horse with a few Asgardian gold coins, only to be mistaken for a madman by the owner, who almost called the police on him. Mortals are truly unreasonable. Thor irritably ran his fingers through his long hair. Can't they see this as pure gold? It's enough to buy their entire town. He felt he had never been so frustrated in his life, from birth until now. His divine power stripped away, unable to lift his hammer, and now even trying to buy a horse got him labeled a lunatic. Just as he was questioning his life, a familiar voice rang out above his head. Thor, if you want to go home, perhaps you should try a plane, not a horse. Thor suddenly looked up, only to see Leon casually floating in midair, holding a cold smoothie. Leon. Thor's eyes instantly widened, a mix of surprise and joy. How did you get here? Leon landed gracefully in front of him, took a sip of the strawberry smoothie in his hand, and smacked his lips. Father sent me to discipline you. He shrugged, his tone flat. And to see if you've smashed a hole in this planet. He looked Thor up and down, at his obviously ill-fitting clothes, and tsked twice. Looks like you're not doing so well. That outfit makes you look like a disgraced drummer. Hey! Thor puffed out his chest in annoyance, trying to maintain his last shred of dignity. I'm just blending in. Oh really? Leon raised an eyebrow. So your way of blending in is to get knocked out by a human girl with a taser and then be treated as mentally ill in a hospital. Thor's face instantly turned beet red. How did he know? Leon looked at his embarrassed expression and couldn't help but laugh. Don't be afraid, Thor, the number of people who know about your affairs is already countless, so this little bit doesn't matter. Alright, stop embarrassing yourself standing here. Leon patted his shoulder. Come with me, I found your hammer. With that, without waiting for Thor to react, he turned and walked towards the direction out of town. Thor was stunned for a moment, then excitedly followed. Mjolnir. Where is it? In a large pit, Leon said without looking back. Surrounded by a bunch of mortals, like they're visiting some rare animal. The two passed through the town and soon arrived at the large pit made by Mjolnir. S.H.I.E.L.D. had already established a temporary base there, with white tents and various high-tech equipment surrounding the pit tightly. What is this? Thor frowned, looking at the scene before him. Your loyal fan club, Leon teased. He pointed to the men in black suits, wearing sunglasses, with bulging waistlines. They're very eager to get your autograph, or your hammer. Just then, the base's alarm suddenly blared. Coulson rushed over with a team of agents, but when he saw Leon and Thor standing together, the expression on his face became complicated. Why is it this guy again? Is this hammer related to them? Gentlemen. Coulson bit the bullet and stepped forward. This is a restricted area, please leave immediately. Thor saw these mortals daring to block him, and immediately became enraged. He strode forward, attempting to force his way in. Get out of the way. My stuff is in there. Several agents immediately stepped forward to block him, but their strength was like a praying mantis trying to stop a chariot in front of Thor. Leon stood to the side, watching with interest, showing no intention of intervening. He was like a spectator at a show, even pulling out a nearby chair and leisurely sitting down. Coulson looked at the chaotic scene before him, feeling a splitting headache. Why is this guy here again? He looked at the casually seated Leon, a deep sense of powerlessness rising in his heart. This was not a god, this was clearly a devil here to cause trouble. Bang! Just as Coulson was about to call for backup, a gunshot suddenly came from the base's watchtower. It wasn't a handgun, but a large-caliber sniper rifle. The target was Leon, who was sitting in the chair watching the show. Coulson's heart instantly leapt to his throat. Is this a spy? No. He screamed in horror, but it was already too late. The bullet ripped through the air, whistling as it shot towards Leon's temple. However, just like the scene in the desert before, the bullet stopped in midair again. Leon didn't even turn his head, merely frowned impatiently, seemingly annoyed that his enjoyment of the show had been disturbed. He gently waved his hand, as if shooing away an annoying mosquito. Whoosh! That sniper bullet, along with the sniper on the watchtower and the sniper rifle in his hand, instantly turned into a wisp of golden light and dissipated into the air. Yes, it was simple evaporation, physical evaporation. This was Leon's most basic energy manipulation, the same principle as Thor summoning lightning. The base fell silent. All the agents stared blankly at this scene, even Thor, who was pushing and shoving with the agents, stopped his movements. Leon turned his head, looked at Coulson calmly, and slowly spoke. Agent Coulson, it seems your subordinates have a poor memory. Coulson felt his blood almost freeze. Cold sweat trickled down his temples, soaking his collar, but he was completely unaware. His brain was currently operating at an extremely high speed, but he could only come to one conclusion. That was despair. Another one died. No, it wasn't as simple as death. That sniper, along with his valuable gun and the entire watchtower he was in, just vanished. Not an explosion, but more like direct evaporation. Exactly like in the desert. Coulson swallowed hard, but his professionalism kept him calm. He forced himself to shift his gaze from the empty sky and refocus on the man in front of him. Leon had already stood up from the lounge chair, leisurely dusting off non-existent dust from his body. The expression on his face was still gentle, a faint smile even playing on his lips, but his golden eyes were icy cold. Sir, Coulson's voice was hoarse. This is a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Leon interrupted him, his tone light and dismissive. The first time, I could consider it nervousness. The second time, Agent Coulson, this is called provocation. He took a step forward, his movements slow, yet the shield. Agents instinctively recoiled. It's over. Coulson's heart sank to the bottom. He could feel Leon's patience wearing thin. He wasn't like Thor, who, though powerful, was outwardly emotional and easily influenced by words. Leon's emotions were restrained, his gentleness was merely a facade, stemming from the arrogance brought by immense power. Once that arrogance was provoked, the consequences would be unimaginable. I apologize for the foolish actions of my subordinates. Coulson immediately lowered his posture, even bowing slightly. We are willing to bear all consequences. Bear consequences. What do mortals have to bear the wrath of a god? Leon found it somewhat amusing. These guys always like to measure everything by their own logic. But they never considered that in the face of absolute power, all rules were meaningless. He ignored Coulson's plea for mercy, merely slowly raised his right hand, spread his 5 fingers, and then gently clenched his fist. Since it's a provocation, there must be a price to pay. His voice remained calm, but the sky changed color. The originally cloudless blue sky was instantly enveloped by a dazzling golden light. It was as if a second sun had appeared out of thin air over New Mexico. What is that? A young agent trembled, pointing at the sky. Several blinding beams of light pierced through the clouds, then suddenly shot down towards them. There was no explosion, no roar. Those shield agents who had aimed their guns at Leon just now, instantly and silently turned into golden particles of light the moment they came into contact with the light beams. Not only that, their disappearance included the ground beneath their feet, which also dissipated into the air. The entire process was very quiet, like a silent purification. Coulson stared blankly at the scene before him, his mind having ceased to function. This had never happened even once in his entire career. In the past, he could at least say he was dealing with people, but Leon, he was truly encountering for the first time. Soon, the agents around him disappeared one by one, leaving behind only shallow, steaming pits. Eventually, only he and Thor, who stood beside Leon, remained at the scene. Thor was also stunned by the sight before him. He knew Leon was strong, but he had never imagined that Leon's combat would be like this. This was no longer a battle, it was a judgment. He recalled the title god of death from 2 millennia ago when Leon waged war across the 9 realms. It turned out that he had never changed, he had only been asleep. Just as Coulson thought he too would be engulfed by the golden light, Leon lowered his hand. The sky returned to a clear blue, as if everything that had just happened was merely an illusion. But the lingering scent in the air and the several shocking craters on the ground all reminded him of what had just transpired. All right, the flies have been cleaned up. Leon clapped his hands, a gentle smile returning to his face, as if he had just casually done a trivial little thing. He turned his head to look at Thor. Now, it's your turn. He pointed to the lone hammer in the center of the pit. Go, Thor, your toy is still waiting for you. Thor snapped out of his shock. He glanced at Leon, his eyes filled with awe, but even more so with a sense of powerlessness. He nodded silently, pushed past Coulson who was blocking his way, and strode towards the meteorite crater. Coulson stood frozen, completely at a loss. Fight, he couldn't win. Beg for mercy, the other party simply ignored him. Now, he could only watch helplessly as Thor went to retrieve his toy. Leon watched Thor's imposing back, the smile at the corner of his mouth deepening. Poor Thor, he still didn't know that Father's enchantment was not just for show. Without his divine power, he was now no different from a slightly stronger mortal. Sure enough, as Thor jumped into the pit and gripped Mjolnir's handle tightly with both hands, something comical happened. He turned red, using all his strength, his arm muscles bulging and veins throbbing. However, the hammer remained stuck, not moving an inch. Get up! Thor roared, his tone perplexed and a little panicked. Impossible. How could this be? Mjolnir was his weapon, a part of his body. Why would it reject him? He tried again and again, failing each time. Finally, he knelt powerlessly beside the hammer, letting out a desperate roar to the sky. No. That sound, one would think his wife had run off with someone else if they didn't know. Coulson came back to his senses, also looking at Thor with some confusion, not understanding why this guy was so fixated on a weapon. Wasn't he Thor? Could it be, he was actually the god of hammers? Leon stood at the edge of the pit, shaking his head. Sigh, how embarrassing, he muttered softly, but his voice clearly reached everyone's ears. Thor suddenly looked up, his eyes bloodshot as he stared at Leon, as if he had found a lifeline. Leon. His voice was hoarse. Why? Why is it like this? Leon's figure instantly appeared beside him, looking down at him. Because you are too foolish, my dear brother. Father has stripped you of your divine power. You are now merely a mortal. And how can a mortal lift a divine artifact? Thor's face grew even paler. He knelt there, dejected, as if all his strength had left him. Leon shook his head, no longer paying him attention, and slowly walked to Mjolnir. Looking at the hammer, he smiled faintly. Then, he bent down and easily gripped the handle with one hand. Old friend, do you still remember me? His voice was very soft, like he was greeting a long-lost friend. Buzz. Mjolnir let out a hum, as if responding to his call. The runes on its surface lit up one by one, and brilliant blue lightning crackled around the hammerhead, beginning to entwine around Leon's arm. Under the shocked gazes of Thor and Coulson, Leon effortlessly lifted Mjolnir from the ground. This is impossible. Thor murmured, feeling his worldview collapse. Not only could Leon lift Mjolnir, but he seemed to do it even more easily than Thor himself. It was as if this hammer was destined to belong to him. Well, poor Thor still didn't know that Odin had originally intended to give Leon the power of Thor, but unfortunately, Leon wasn't interested. Coulson looked at the figure holding Mjolnir in the pit, and an absurd thought resurfaced in his mind, becoming clearer. Perhaps S.H.I.E.L.D. had been targeting the wrong person from the start. The one they should have been trying to win over was never the impulsive Thor, but this unfathomable older brother of Thor. Although he didn't know what kind of god he was, he looked even stronger than Thor. Leon weighed the hammer in his hand, feeling the surging power of thunder emanating from it. Not bad, the feel hasn't changed. He looked up, the clear blue sky reflected in his golden pupils. Then, he raised the hammer. In an instant, the weather changed dramatically. The previously clear sky was instantly covered by dark clouds, and lightning danced wildly within the clouds, emitting deafening roars. Leon's figure slowly ascended into the sky, blue lightning intertwined with the golden divine power emanating from him, making him appear like a god king descending. He flew high into the sky, looking down at the temporary base established by shield below. So. A smile played on his lips, his eyes cold. Let a fireworks display serve as my welcome ceremony for arriving on Earth. He raised Mjolnir high above his head, and a massive amount of lightning descended from the sky, converging on the hammerhead. Boom! A thick, enormous pillar of lightning, carrying an aura of destruction, descended from the sky and struck the center of the shield base. There was no explosion, no fire. Only the all-consuming white. When the light dissipated, the base, which had cost shield countless manpower and resources to build, along with all the high-tech equipment inside, had completely vanished from the ground. All that remained was a massive crater over 1,000 meters in diameter, bottomless, with edges as smooth as a mirror. Coulson. You're amazing. You're so pure. You're using our base as fireworks. Leon slowly landed, casually tossing Mjolnir in front of Thor. With a hum, the hammer once again became heavy as a mountain, deeply embedding itself in the ground. He took one last look at Thor, who was kneeling on the ground, and shook his head. Thor, experience the life of a mortal well. Only when you understand Father's painstaking efforts will you be able to wield this hammer again. Having said that, he turned, his golden figure seemingly about to transform into light particles and depart. However, just as he was about to leave, an angry roar came from behind him. Stop! Leon's footsteps paused. He slowly turned back, a playful smile on his face. Thor had already stood up from the ground, his eyes now bloodshot, staring intently at Leon. His chest heaved violently, and his clenched fists trembled slightly from the exertion. Why? Thor's voice was hoarse, every word seemingly squeezed through his teeth. Why is it you? Why do you always have everything so easily? Power, glory, Father's approval, even my hammer. He pointed at Mjolnir on the ground, then at Leon. I've strived for thousands of years. I've fought across the 9 realms for Asgard. I've given my all to become a warrior as strong as you. But what's the result? The result is I'm stripped of my divine power, exiled like a mortal. And you lazy good-for-nothing who only knows how to lie in the garden sunbathing all day, can effortlessly lift it and control lightning. Thor's questioning, or rather, his accusation, echoed over the silent, massive crater. Coulson stood in the distance, not daring to breathe, quietly watching the show. God, what kind of family drama was this? The younger brother publicly accusing the older brother. And neither of them were ordinary people. Leon looked at his almost collapsing younger brother, the smile on his face gradually receding, replaced by indifference. So? He asked indifferently. So I'm going to duel you. Thor roared, charging at Leon like an enraged bull. Even without divine power, I am still a warrior of Asgard. I will use my fists to reclaim my dignity. Thor's body had been tempered for 1,000 years, even without divine power, he was several times stronger than the top athletes on Earth. One punch from him was enough to easily punch through a steel plate. However, as his fist was about to smash into Leon's face, it was casually caught by a hand. Leon didn't even change his posture, he simply raised his hand casually and firmly gripped Thor's fist. Thor's pupils suddenly constricted, he felt his fist sink into mud, the other's palm unmoving. Dignity. There was no ripple in Leon's eyes as he looked at Thor and slowly spoke. Thor, what you call dignity, in my opinion, is nothing more than the wailing of the weak. He yanked Thor forward, then kicked him directly, controlling the force precisely to ensure Thor wouldn't be sent flying. Thor suffered a heavy blow, feeling as if he had been struck by a large hammer, instantly bending over and kneeling on the ground, his face grim. Leon squatted down, a slight smile on his lips, and gently patted Thor's face. My foolish younger brother, after all these years, you're still so impulsive. Have you forgotten how I used to defeat you? Thor stared intently at Leon, as if Leon had stolen his wife. He was unconvinced why Leon was so powerful. He had no objection to Leon acquiring all this power, it was what he deserved. He and Loki had questioned Leon's attitude, but they had never questioned Leon's strength. What he couldn't understand was why Leon was so powerful without doing anything. And what about himself? He had diligently served Asgard, always thinking of fighting for the realm and expanding its territory. But what did he get in return? His father's misunderstanding, Leon's lack of support, Loki's mockery. He just wanted to ask one thing now. What exactly had he, Thor, done? Leon chuckled, observing Thor and watching his expressions change. Tisk tisk, look at those little eyes. Thor, oh Thor, if Asgard were truly in your hands, that would truly be the end. It seems I, as his older brother, need to teach him a lesson. Without further thought, Leon smiled slightly, then slowly raised his right hand under Thor's terrified gaze. Leon, what are you doing? Thor cried out in terror. What am I doing? You'll know soon enough. Leon smiled, but his actions didn't stop. Slap. A hard slap landed on Thor's face, but Leon controlled the force, leaving no mark. Thor came to his senses, and just as he was about to say something, Leon's other slap already arrived. Slap. You're Thor, right. Slap. Your power, right. Slap. Your glory, right. Slap. You're a slacker, right. Slap. You're a duel, right. Leon raised his right hand again but didn't bring it down. Thor instinctively dodged. He lowered his hand and shook his head. You're too weak, Thor. Leon's other hand formed a hand knife and precisely struck the back of his neck. Bang! Thor's vision went black, his consciousness instantly blurred, and then he softly collapsed. Don't you understand yet? Before his consciousness completely faded, Leon's voice echoed in his ear. The gap between you and me has never been about divine power, nor about this hammer. It's here. Leon extended his finger and gently tapped his own temple. You think with your muscles, and I, with this. Thor wanted to say something, but he was no longer able. Leon looked at the unconscious Thor and shook his head. Fighting a mortal who had lost his divine power was too demeaning. However, as he had just said, as an older brother, it was necessary to discipline a disobedient younger brother. He raised his foot and gently kicked Thor's backside. Bang! With a muffled thud, Thor was kicked away like a ball, sliding over 100 meters on the ground, finally stopping when he hit the crater wall. Are you awake now? Leon's voice echoed in Thor's ears, though he could no longer hear it. After doing all this, he turned and walked towards Coulson, a gentle smile returning to his face. Agent Coulson, it seems my younger brother needs a little extra care. He pointed to the humanoid imprint embedded in the crater wall in the distance. Please, take him away. Coulson. He looked at the humanoid imprint and the unconscious Thor in the distance, finally letting out a long sigh of relief. Hallelujah. No matter what, at least he was still alive. He picked up the walkie-talkie, his voice returning to its usual calm, but his heart was pounding. Calling headquarters. Yes, officer, we might need a medical team and an engineering team. 10 minutes later. SHIELD. Triskelion headquarters, highest command room. Black Nick Fury, motherfuller hero. Nick Fury pressed one hand to his temple, his single eye bloodshot. On the holographic screen in front of him, satellite images of the New Mexico desert were looping. In the center of the image was a giant crater over a kilometer in diameter, like an ugly scar, branded on the surface of Earth, and branded on his heart. Yes, officer, the entire base, along with all equipment and personnel, has vanished. Coulson's voice came through the encrypted communication. Preliminary assessment is that it was evaporated by instantaneous high-temperature energy. Fury's fist quietly clenched under the table. Evaporated. That word was used very casually. But behind it lay the sacrifice of dozens of SHIELD elite agents, and billions of US dollars worth of high-tech equipment reduced to nothing. The target. Fury's voice was deep. Target Leon has left, destination unknown. Target Thor has lost all abnormal energy reactions and is currently unconscious. We are preparing to take him back to a temporary medical point. Bring him back to the base, rebuild one, Fury interrupted Coulson. Use the highest security measures. Also. He paused, his single eye fixed on a screenshot of Leon leisurely sitting in a lounge chair on the screen. Elevate Leon's threat level to maximum. All field units are prohibited from any form of contact with the target unless they receive my direct order. Repeat, any form. This order made Coulson on the other end of the communication frown. The highest threat level was the code name reserved for world-ending disasters like alien fleet invasions. And now, that code name belonged to one person. Fury hung up the communication, leaning back in his chair, exhausted. He felt as if he had never been so powerless. His entire life, he had tried to control everything, to bring all threats into his calculations. But now, two chess pieces he completely couldn't understand had suddenly appeared on the board. No, they weren't chess pieces, they were beings who could flip the board at any time. Sun God, Leon, Fury muttered to himself, a ruthless glint flashing in his single eye. I don't care what kind of god you are, this is Earth. This is human territory. Meanwhile, Leon was leisurely floating above the small town in New Mexico. He wasn't in a hurry to leave, instead savoring the air of this world. The sun's rays shone on him, bringing a feeling completely different from Asgard's white stars. The energy here was wilder, full of life's vitality. Not bad, it really was a good place for a vacation. He looked at his foolish younger brother, who had been knocked unconscious by his kick below. At this moment, Thor was being carefully extracted from the pit wall by Coulson's subordinates, then lifted onto a stretcher as if he were some fragile treasure, which Leon found somewhat amusing. I hope this lesson will make you remember, Thor, Leon said with a faint smile. Otherwise, next time, I won't just be kicking your butt. He didn't really want to hurt Thor. After all, he was his younger brother whom he had watched grow up. But Thor's arrogance and recklessness would sooner or later bring disaster to Asgard. Odin's way of educating was too gentle, and he, as the elder brother, had a duty to make Thor understand what awe was in a more profound way. As for S.H.I.E.L.D., Leon's lips curled into a cold smile. A bunch of self-righteous guys, attempting to use some methods to speculate about gods. If it was genuinely for the benefit of humanity, then so be it, but what has S.H.I.E.L.D. become? A snake's nest. Or a green-skinned monster's nest. Even the Earth's strongest superhero, Captain Marvel, was a traitor to the planet, let alone the Cotton Machine, who had a close relationship with Captain Marvel. Leon had always disliked the semi-automatic Cotton Machine. Even Asgard didn't have people this stupid, except for Thor, of course. They came from humble backgrounds, had low status, and were not only very unintelligent but also had very low emotional intelligence. Besides they're good at sports, they were not good at any other kind of movement, they were simply hopeless. He wasn't making wild guesses about Captain Marvel, wasn't that how it played out in the movie? Unless the plot of this universe was different, it absolutely couldn't be wrong. But Captain Marvel not helping the Skrulls. Is that possible? Leon shook his head. He looked at the agents below. If he had to explain, he felt these people were like a group of primitives gathered around a bonfire, trying to understand the principle of nuclear fusion. Cute, yet pathetic. He didn't plan to go to war with S.H.I.E.L.D. immediately, that would be too boring. He preferred to, like now, gradually turn the already preset plot of this world upside down. For him, it was a long-awaited game. A game enough to relieve boredom for 1,000 years. So, first stop, where should I go? Leon's perception instantly covered the entire town. He heard the arguments between Jane Foster and Daisy, heard Professor Eric's worries, and also heard the sizzling sound of hamburger patties in a local small restaurant. This is it. He snapped his fingers, and his figure instantly turned into particles of light, disappearing from the spot. In the town's only restaurant, Jane Foster was irritably poking her fried egg with a fork. Jane Foster. I'm sure that was definitely not ordinary lightning. Its energy spectrum, particle composition, were completely consistent with the fluctuations of the Einstein-Rosen bridge I observed before. She explained to her companion for the 4th time, but what she got in return was still Daisy's expression of, "You're right about everything, but I don't believe it." Daisy Lewis, the intern majoring in political science, was at this moment completely focused on the waffle in front of her, drenched in maple syrup. Daisy Lewis. Jane, Dear, she mumbled. I understand your passion for science. But what we should be more concerned about right now is our expensive Chevrolet, which was smashed by a muscular man who fell from the sky. And we didn't even get his driver's license information. Professor Eric Selvig sat by, helplessly rubbing his temples. He had to both appease the emotional Jane and deal with the erratic Daisy, feeling his brain cells dying in batches. Daisy, Jane's discovery could be the greatest astrophysical breakthrough of this century, he tried to reason. And you, Mr. Thor. He looked at Jane. We don't even know where he came from, his appearance itself is a mystery. Just then, the doorbell at the restaurant's entrance rang crisply. A man in golden casual clothes walked in. His hair shimmered in the sunlight, his golden eyes were like two warm gems, and he had a lazy smile on his face. He just stood there quietly, yet he attracted the gaze of the entire restaurant. Wow! Daisy's fork stopped midair, and she forgot to wipe the syrup from the corner of her mouth. Is this one also from the sky? Jane and Eric also subconsciously looked over. Their first reaction was that this man and the muscular man named Thor were two extremes. If Thor was a violent thunder, then this man was a tranquil sun, warm and dazzling, yet with a majesty that made people dare not look directly at him. Leon ignored the surrounding gazes and walked straight to the bar, giving a gentle smile to the stunned waitress. Hello, a strawberry smoothie for me, double sugar, please, thank you. His voice was neither loud nor soft, yet it clearly reached everyone's ears. The waitress's face instantly turned red, and she fumbled to operate the smoothie machine. A handsome face, a tall and sturdy build, and a hint of chest muscles. Is this guy a model? Leon got his smoothie, took a satisfied sip, then turned around, his gaze falling directly on Jane Foster's table. He walked over slowly, and under the surprised gazes of the three, he pulled out a chair and sat down on his own. Hello, he said with a smile, his eyes sweeping over the three. Do you mind if I join your table? This seems to be the only quiet spot. Jane, Daisy, Eric. Quiet. Didn't you see everyone in the entire restaurant staring at you? Jane was the first to react. She pushed up her glasses, suppressing her inner excitement, and tentatively asked, Sir, excuse me, do we know each other? You look somewhat familiar. She always felt that this man's demeanor and that of the guy who called himself Thor had a strange similarity. We don't know each other. Leon shook his head and took another sip of his smoothie. However, I know you all. He looked at Jane. Dr. Jane Foster, a genius in astrophysics, dedicated to researching the Einstein-Rosen bridge. Unfortunately, your research funding is always withheld by those old fogies at the observatory. He then looked at Daisy, a smile on his lips. Daisy Lewis, an intern majoring in political science, taking this course just for credits, and incidentally, zapping handsome guys with a taser. Finally, his gaze fell on Eric. Professor Eric Selvig, Dr. Foster's mentor and close friend, a huge fan of Norse mythology, right? The three were petrified. Their expressions were as if they had seen a ghost. Daisy's waffle clattered back onto her plate. Jane's mouth was open wide enough to fit an egg. Eric's face, however, became solemn. Who exactly are you? Jane's voice trembled slightly. This man not only knew their names and identities but even their most private thoughts and complaints were crystal clear to him. This was beyond what a simple background check could achieve. Was this mind reading? Me. Leon smiled, a hint of slyness flashing in his pupils. My name is Leon. As for my identity, he deliberately drew out his tone, watching the nervous expressions of the three, finding it very amusing. I am Thor's brother. Boom. This answer made the three even more confused. Thor's brother. That muscular man who fell from the sky actually had a brother. Just then, the restaurant door was roughly pushed open again. Coulson rushed in with a team of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents. This time, they were armed. Dr. Jane Foster. Coulson's expression was serious. According to the Homeland Security Act, all your research data and equipment are now taken over by S.H.I.E.L.D. Jane stood up abruptly. You can't do that. That's my life's work. Daisy also stood up, and though a little scared, she still bravely said, Hey. This is robbery. Leon remained leisurely seated, drinking his smoothie, as if everything happening before him had nothing to do with him. He looked at Coulson's businesslike face, then at Jane Foster's angry expression, and the smile on his lips grew wider. The show has begun. Coulson felt his head hurt even more than when he was just suppressed by Leon's aura. What he was facing now was a group of creatures even more troublesome than that blonde god. That's right, angry scientists. According to Article Section 3 of the Act, we have the right to requisition any relevant research materials in cases involving national security and supernatural phenomena. Dr. Foster, please cooperate. Coulson patiently explained, while vigilantly glancing out of the corner of his eye at Leon, who was sitting in the corner, minding his own business. From the moment they entered, this guy hadn't even changed his posture. Instead, he was leisurely sipping a smoothie, and even watched the farce in front of him with interest, as if enjoying a stage play. What's with this familiar feeling? This feeling of being ignored made Coulson feel pressured. Just kill me. He would rather Leon be as furious as Thor, at least then he could conduct crisis assessments and negotiations. But now, the other party's calmness was like an ocean, you never knew what kind of giant beasts were hidden beneath the surface. The agents behind him were even more nervous, their palms sweating. Although their weapons were advanced, after witnessing Leon instantly vaporize their colleagues and base. They felt that the sense of security these weapons brought them was not even as good as a roll of toilet paper. Jane Foster's face turned crimson, she pointed at Coulson, indignant, national security. My research is astrophysics. It's for exploring the universe. What does it have to do with you agents who only know how to destroy? Daisy chimed in from the side, her voice a little shaky but her momentum undiminished. Exactly. What right do you have to steal other people's things? This is illegal trespassing on private property. I'm going to call my lawyer. Professor Selvig tried to mediate, he stood in front of Jane and said to Coulson, Agent, can we communicate in a different way? Jane's research is of great significance to all mankind, and we are willing to cooperate, but not in this coercive way. Coulson rubbed his temples, he knew this mission had gone wrong from the start. Fury's order was to obtain the data at all costs, but he didn't tell him there would be a god who could vaporize everything present. He just wanted to take these materials away as soon as possible, and then get as far away from Leon as possible. Doctor, I'm very sorry, but this is an order. Coulson's tone became tougher, he had to end this farce quickly. He winked at the agents behind him, signaling them to act. Two agents immediately stepped forward, trying to snatch her research notes from Jane's hands. You wouldn't dare. Jane clutched the notebook tightly. Fortunately, they were in the United States, otherwise it would have been the full set of screaming, crawling, and rolling, plus a charge of romantical harassment from a distance, and the agent's salary would probably not be enough to cover it. Just as a physical conflict was about to break out between the two sides, a lazy voice suddenly sounded, not loud, but it perfectly suppressed all the quarrels. Agent Coulson, isn't it? Leon put down the smoothie cup in his hand, he slowly raised his head, his gaze sweeping over everyone present. Very good, we meet again. The entire restaurant instantly fell silent. Everyone's eyes were focused on him. Coulson's heart skipped a beat, he knew the worst had happened. Leon unhurriedly wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin, then stood up and slowly walked towards Coulson. His pace was not fast, but it carried an invisible sense of oppression, every step was like stepping on everyone's heartstrings. Well, Agent. Leon walked up to him, a head taller than his 180 centimeters height, looking down at him with a gentle smile on his face. I seem to remember saying that I like quiet. Coulson felt his breathing become difficult. He could clearly see his own reflection in Leon's golden eyes, tiny, fragile, and vulnerable. Sir. He spoke with difficulty, this is our official business. Official business. Leon chuckled softly, he suddenly reached out and gently patted Coulson's shoulder. Your official business has disturbed my vacation. This makes me very unhappy. As his voice fell, Coulson and the shield agents behind him suddenly felt as if they were being crushed by a mountain. Thud. Thud. Their energy weapons instantly slipped from their hands, and they uniformly knelt on one knee on the ground, as if worshipping their king. Their faces were filled with terror and confusion. They tried to stand up but found their bodies felt as if they were filled with lead, unable to move even a finger. What kind of power is this? Coulson knelt on the ground, cold sweat pouring down his forehead like rain. He finally understood that what he was facing was not some special individual at all, but a true god. He couldn't even raise the thought of resisting. Jane, Daisy, and Eric were also stunned. They gaped, watching the scene before them, their minds blank. The SHIELD agents who were so aggressive a second ago, all knelt down the next second. And the other party didn't even move a finger. Now, it's much quieter. Leon nodded in satisfaction, he withdrew his aura. The agents kneeling on the ground immediately felt the pressure ease, collapsing to the ground, gasping for breath. Leon ignored them and turned to look at Jane Foster. Dr. Foster. His voice returned to its gentle tone. Could I borrow your research notes? I'm very interested in that Bifrost bridge you mentioned. Jane subconsciously handed over the notebook, the entire process like sleepwalking. Leon took the notebook and casually flipped through a few pages. As a person from Asgard, he was, of course, well versed in these theories, but he just wanted to look at them. Somewhat interesting. He closed the notebook and handed it back to Jane. Although most of the theories are wrong, the ideas are good. Most of them are wrong. Jane Foster felt her professional pride challenged. Her life's research, in this man's eyes, was only good ideas. But she couldn't refute him. Because the power the other party had just displayed far exceeded the scope of her understanding. So, Leon turned his head, looking back at Coulson, who was still slumped on the ground. Now, you can scram. His tone was flat, like he was shooing away a few annoying flies. Coulson, as if granted a great pardon, struggled to get up from the ground, and with his subordinates, scrambled out of the restaurant, not even bothering with the weapons that had fallen to the ground. Only Leon and the petrified trio remained in the entire restaurant. Leon sat back down in his chair, picked up the almost melted smoothie, and took a leisurely sip. All right, now we can continue our previous conversation, he said with a smile. Where were you just now? Oh, right, talking about my foolish brother. SHIELD's Triskelion headquarters, highest command room. Nick Fury's single eye stared intently at the screen, which showed the last footage sent back by Coulson's action team via a miniature camera. The image froze on Leon's golden eyes, calm, indifferent, yet disdainful of everything. That's the full account, officer, Coulson's voice came through the communicator, still carrying uncalm emotions. Fury was silent for a long time. The command room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. So, you're saying he made all of you kneel just with his aura? Fury's voice held some doubt. Yes, officer. It felt like the weight of the entire planet was pressing down on us. We were utterly powerless. Fury slowly closed his single eye. He lost. From the moment Leon descended to Earth, he had already lost. His intelligence network, high-tech weapons, and elite agents, all that he prided himself on, became laughable toys in front of him. What in the world is happening? First, a playboy in a tin can appeared in Afghanistan. Now, two brothers claiming to be gods fell from the sky. Each one more unreasonable than the last, each one harder to control. Fury rubbed his temples, feeling that the preliminary draft for the Avengers initiative now looked like a joke. He had originally intended to assemble a team to deal with threats like the Kree, but now, the threat level had been raised to a whole new height. Officer. Coulson's tentative voice came through the communicator. I understand. Fury opened his eye, no longer angry, only rational. Reclassify Leon's file as top secret, codenamed Sun. All intelligence about him is to be reported directly to me. He paused, then added, also, accelerate the plan's progress. We need more powerful weapons. Understood, officer. Hanging up the communication, Fury turned and walked to the other side of the command room. He pulled up an encrypted file containing information on several candidates. Tony Stark. The man in the photo gave a flippant smile to the camera. Fury's mouth twitched. One problem was enough. Bruce Banner. The data showed he was currently hiding in a slum in Brazil. Abnormal fluctuations in gamma energy were SHIELD's only lead to track him. Fury looked at the clear photo and shook his head. An emotionally unstable bomb, not much use even if he came. Steve Rogers. Next to the information was noted, frozen, awaiting excavation. Fury looked at this list and suddenly felt powerless. His Avengers were still far from taking shape. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere remained awkward. Jane, Daisy, and Eric were still reeling from the shock and hadn't recovered. Leon, meanwhile, had finished his second smoothie and was idly drawing circles on the table with his finger. He knew S.H.I.E.L.D. wouldn't just give up. He also knew that the destroyer, the Ironcon that Odin would soon use as a warehouse guard, was about to make its appearance. And that would be the second growth package for Thor. He wasn't good at much else, but he loved watching dramas and fanning the flames. Since he had come to this world, if he didn't personally direct a few grand plays, wouldn't it be a wasted trip? So, Daisy looked at Leon cautiously, asking tentatively. Are you really Thor's brother? Are you all gods? Something like that. Leon shrugged. But I prefer to be called Prince. The word, God, sounds too old-fashioned. Jane also snapped out of it. She looked at Leon, excited. This was a living god. If she could research. Does your power stem from some unknown cosmic energy? Or has your civilization mastered the technology to manipulate fundamental physical laws? You could understand it as a talent, Leon said casually. Just then, a commotion erupted outside the restaurant. Thor, who had been released at some point, was now surrounded by a crowd of townspeople, walking into the restaurant like a hero. His face showed a hint of embarrassment, but more so a joy of being acknowledged. Hey, Jane. He saw Jane Foster and immediately waved excitedly. Then, his gaze fell on Leon, and the smile on his face instantly froze. Leon, what are you doing here too? Leon looked at him, then at the adoring townspeople behind him, and smiled. It seems you had a lot of fun while I was away, Mr. Thor. Thor froze in place. His head buzzed. The pride and vanity he felt from being surrounded by the townspeople vanished the moment he saw Leon's smiling eyes. All that remained was the guilt and embarrassment of being caught red-handed by his brother. Why was he here? Shouldn't he be? Wait, where should he be? Thor's memory was still stuck in that giant pit, where he was beaten up by his elder brother, and then, it seemed he didn't know anything after that. Thor roared internally. He woke up in an unfamiliar room, and the mortal named Coulson told him he had fainted from exhaustion. After that, he was released, and with the powerful physique of an Asgardian, he quickly recovered. He had just arm wrestled the strongman in town and won a case of beer, and then he repaired an old lady's tractor with his bare hands. He reveled in the admiring gazes of the mortals, feeling that even without his divine power, he was still the coolest guy on the street. As a result, his elder brother, who was so powerful he was despair-inducing, suddenly appeared before him again, looking at him with an expression that said, let's see how you'll act now. Why is Leon everywhere? It's over, now I'm embarrassed all the way to Midgard. Thor took a deep breath, thinking about how to say the first sentence. Jane, Daisy, and Eric were also bewildered. They looked at Thor and Leon, suddenly feeling like some big drama was about to unfold. So, this elegant, powerful, unfathomable man was really the brother of Thor, this muscular brute who only knew how to smash things. The difference in their styles was too great. Daisy's gossip soul was burning brightly. Hee, a love triangle between divine brothers. This is much more interesting than political science. She quietly took out her phone, ready to record this moment. Leon ignored Thor's predicament, slowly finished the last sip of his smoothie, and then wiped his mouth with a napkin. What, aren't you going to introduce me to your new friends? Leon's gaze swept over the three, asking deliberately. Although they had just met, he still wanted to see how Thor would introduce him. For no other reason than that in Thor's eyes, his elder brother was a very old-fashioned person, and also the future king of Asgard. In the eyes of Asgardians, only Sif was worthy of Thor. He wondered if Thor would consider what would happen if his elder brother knew he had fallen for a woman from Midgard. Thor finally came back to his senses. He scratched his head awkwardly and walked forward to introduce everyone. Leon, this is Dr. Jane Foster, and her friends Daisy and Professor Eric. Jane, this is my brother, Leon. Hello. Leon smiled and nodded at the three. His smile was gentle and polite, yet it carried an inherent sense of detachment. It was as if the sun shone equally on every flower and plant on earth, yet never truly cared about the withering or flourishing of any single one. Your Highness Leon. Although Jane noticed Leon's prank on Thor and felt like laughing. After witnessing his power, she nervously pushed up her glasses. She didn't know how to address this man who seemed like a god. After some thought, she decided to go along with Leon's words, pretending not to know him. You, too, are from Asgard. Of course. Leon pulled out a chair, gesturing for Thor to sit down. Otherwise, where did you think we popped out from? Thor sat down glumly, feeling like he was always a child who had done something wrong in front of Leon. Daisy finally found an opportunity to speak. She put down her phone and looked at the two with curiosity. So, you really are gods. Like from Norse mythology. Well, you already are. So what do you usually eat? Do you use cell phones? Do you have Wi-Fi there? Her string of questions made Professor Eric rub his forehead. Leon looked at her and suddenly laughed, finding her somewhat adorably silly. You might not be able to digest what we eat. As for cell phones and Wi-Fi. He paused, then added, you can think of it as us using a more advanced version. Hearing this, Thor felt even more depressed. He remembered when he first arrived, he was also gawked at like this, but he wasn't as composed as Leon. He would just yell and then get knocked out by electricity. But Leon, he just sat there, and it was as if the entire world should revolve around him. What kind of logic was this? Was this the difference? Just then, the restaurant door was pushed open again. But this time, it wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who entered, but several burly men in leather jackets, looking menacing. The leader was a bald man with a scarred face. He kicked over a table and menacingly scanned the people in the restaurant. Who is Donald Blake? The bald man's voice was rough, with a heavy accent. The atmosphere in the restaurant instantly became tense, and several townspeople shrank into corners in fear. There was even a white-bearded old man with glasses who grumbled as he walked to the corner. He had a slicked-back hairstyle, wore a jacket, and held a Captain America action figure. Even as he squatted in the corner, his curses could still be heard. Steve, why aren't you coming out yet? Jane and Daisy also looked nervously at Thor, because Donald Blake was the fake name they had casually given Thor for convenience. Thor's brows furrowed instantly. Although he had lost his divine power, his pride as a prince of Asgard remained. He suddenly stood up, about to speak. Stop. Before he could utter his line, Leon's gaze silenced him. Leon remained seated, watching the unwelcome guests with interest. In his opinion, for even such low-level thugs to dare to cause trouble for Thor, he truly was a failure. I am. Thor saw Leon's gaze and knew he shouldn't be impulsive. He took a deep breath, mimicking Leon's demeanor, trying to appear calmer. He stood in front of Jane and Daisy and said in a deep voice, "What do you want with me?" The bald strongman looked him up and down, a disdainful smile on his face. You. A pretty boy who only sponges off women. Don't joke around. We're looking for the guy who can punch people through walls. His gaze finally fell on Leon. Apparently, the stories of Thor arm wrestling in the bar and later being beaten up by Leon had already spread through the town. And these thugs had clearly confused the protagonists of these two incidents. Thor's face instantly turned ugly. He wanted to retort, to tell them that he was the hero who arm wrestled, but the words caught in his throat and turned into silence. Because he knew that the one who was later punched through the wall was indeed himself. Hey, guys. Daisy mustered her courage and stood up. Are you looking for the wrong person? The person you're looking for isn't here. The bald strongman sneered, pulled a pistol from his waistband, and aimed it at Daisy. Lady, I advise you not to meddle. The atmosphere in the restaurant dropped to freezing point. Jane and Eric both nervously shielded Daisy, and Thor was trembling with rage, his fists clenched. He hated being powerless now, only able to watch his friends be threatened by mortals. Indeed, even a taser could take him down, let alone firearms. Leon was going to show off again. However, just as the tension mounted, a lazy voice once again broke the silence. Wow. Leon wiped his hands with a napkin, slowly looked up, his pupils showing no ripple. That toy in your hand looks even more primitive than S.H.I.E.L.D.'s. The bald strongman was stunned for a moment. He turned his head and then carefully observed the man who had been sitting in the corner. He saw Leon's face, which was too handsome to be human, and a flash of jealousy appeared in his eyes. Kid, who are you? Trying to be a hero. He pointed the gun at Leon. Leon didn't answer. He just looked at the gun, shook his head, and showed a helpless expression, like he was looking at an unreasonable child. I just think, he said softly. It's very ill-mannered to point such a thing at a lady. Oh, my goodness. The bald strongman sounded as if he had heard the biggest joke. Manners. Here, fists are manners. Kid, I'll give you one more chance, get out of my sight immediately, or else. Before he could finish his sentence, Thor had reached his limit. Enough. He roared and charged forward. Although he had lost his divine power, his combat skills, honed over 1,000 years of fighting, remained. He dodged the bald strongman's gun muzzle with a sidestep and, with a swift elbow strike, accurately hit the opponent's wrist. Ah! The bald man screamed, and the pistol flew out of his hand. Thor didn't pause, delivering a fluid combination of punches that sent the bald strongman reeling backward, finally ending with a beautiful over-the-shoulder throw that slammed him onto the dining table. Bang! The table shattered, and the bald strongman lay in the fragments, completely knocked out. Wow! Daisy exclaimed excitedly. The other townspeople in the restaurant also burst into cheers. The white-bearded old man excitedly threw his Captain America action figure to the ground. Kill that fool guy, point break. Leon glanced at the old man, shook his head, and smiled. Sure enough, he could meet this old man everywhere. Leon had seen him several times in this universe, appearing in unexpected places every time. Seeing this, the bald strongman's accomplices also drew their weapons and rushed forward. Although Thor was brave, he had lost his divine power after all. Facing several armed thugs, he quickly fell into a bitter struggle. Although he could dodge most attacks, he still inevitably sustained several wounds on his body. Leon remained seated, watching with interest. Not bad, at least he still knew to protect ladies, not completely disgracing Asgard. He watched Thor, though disheveled in the encirclement, his eyes becoming increasingly firm, and he nodded slightly in his heart. Perhaps, Father's decision was not entirely wrong. Thor truly wouldn't grow without some training. Though he didn't know why it had to be on Earth, as if only Earth could train a prince. But no matter what, Thor had grown. Just as a thug circled behind Thor and raised a steel pipe to ambush him, Leon finally moved. He didn't stand up, or even turn around. He just lightly drew a circle on the table with his finger. Buzz. An imperceptible golden light flashed. The thug holding the steel pipe suddenly felt his body was no longer obeying him. He watched helplessly as the steel pipe in his hand strangely changed direction and then slammed heavily onto his own head. Thud. With a dull thud, the thug's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed limply. Thor seized the opportunity to deal with the last enemy. He panted heavily, looking at the thug sprawled on the ground and Leon still sitting in his seat, his eyes somewhat complex. He knew that if Leon hadn't secretly intervened just now, he would probably have been injured. Leon ignored his gaze, he merely wiped his hands with a napkin. All right, the flies are cleaned up. He clapped his hands, as if he had just done a trivial little thing. Taking a sip of his smoothie, he looked at Jane. Dr. Foster, where were we? Oh, right, we were talking about how my silly younger brother became the hero of this small town by arm wrestling. Jane, Daisy, Eric. They felt their worldview had been mercilessly shattered today. How long had it been, and how did two gods suddenly appear on Earth? While a farce was unfolding in the small town restaurant, a storm was brewing in distant Asgard. Loki stood outside Odin's bedchamber. He looked at his sleeping father, complex emotions flashing in his eyes. Father, I just wanted to prove that I am more suited for this throne than Thor and Leon. He said softly. He walked slowly to the vault and picked up the casket of ancient winters, which belonged to the frost giants. A chilling cold instantly surged from the casket, and Loki's arm turned the characteristic blue of a frost giant upon contact with the cold. So, I am the monster. He murmured, looking at his arm. Just then, Heimdall's voice boomed in his mind. Prince Loki. Sif and the Warriors 3 have gone to Midgard. Loki's face instantly changed. These idiots. He knew they must have gone to bring Thor and Leon back. But this would completely disrupt his plans. He had to stop them. He immediately found Heimdall and used the power of the casket of ancient winters to freeze the loyal gatekeeper. Then, he walked to the deepest part of the vault. There, Asgard's most powerful ultimate weapon was stored. The Destroyer. Now, it's my turn. Loki's hand pressed on the Destroyer's runes. Go, my servant. Go to Midgard and crush everyone who stands in my way. Inside the restaurant, Leon and Thor were having a lively conversation with the three women and Professor Selvig. Just then, the restaurant door was pushed open again, but this time it wasn't S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, but Sif and the Warriors 3. They were dressed in Asgardian battle armor, travel-stained, with anxious expressions on their faces. Thor. Sif saw Thor and immediately hurried forward. Do you know where Your Highness Leon is? We're here to take Your Highness Leon back. Loki, he. Her words trailed off as she saw the figure sitting leisurely across from Thor. Your Highness Leon. Sif and the Warriors 3 were stunned at the same time. They instinctively knelt on one knee and gave a standard military salute. Leon raised an eyebrow, glanced at these uninvited old friends and the bewildered Thor. They arrived so fast. How long has it been? Tisk, there's no good show to watch now. Get up. His voice was still lazy. Are you all coming to Midgard with such a big show to participate in Thor's arm wrestling contest? Volstag's big bearded face instantly flushed red. Your Highness, we are here to. We are here to stop Loki's conspiracy. Sif stood up, her expression serious. Loki usurped the throne. He froze Heimdall and even tried to assassinate the sleeping All-Father. What? Thor suddenly stood up, his eyes instantly burning with rage. Loki, he dares. The atmosphere in the restaurant instantly became tense. Jane, Daisy, and Professor Eric were confused, but they could feel the Asgardian storm, which seemed to be about to descend upon this small town in New Mexico. Leon's heart was calm, almost wanting to laugh. Now he knew the plot, and even if he didn't, he wouldn't care about Loki usurping the throne. This little trick could only fool simple-minded guys like Thor. Father Odin was merely using this opportunity of Odin's sleep to see what kind of mischief his two sons could stir up. And now, with himself, the biggest variable, arriving on Earth, this game of chess had become even more interesting. So, Leon wiped his hands with a napkin, slowly raised his head, and swept his gaze over the agitated Thor and the anxious Sif and the others. What do you plan to do? Rush back to Asgard, drag Loki off the throne, and then make him cry and shout, "Brother, I was wrong." Exactly. Thor answered without thinking. Foolish, Leon commented unceremoniously. If it weren't for me, and you can't even lift Mjolnir now, are you going back to die? Thor's face turned beet red. Being exposed by Leon in front of his friends made him feel somewhat humiliated. Just then, the entire town suddenly shook violently, as if an earthquake had occurred. Dishes and cups in the restaurant clattered, and everyone instinctively grabbed onto something nearby. What's going on? Daisy screamed in terror. A golden light flashed in Leon's eyes, his gaze instantly penetrated the restaurant walls, revealing a doomsday-like scene in the town center. The sky had, at some point, grown dim. A scorching rainbow-colored pillar of light descended from the sky, burning a huge circular scorch mark on the town's main street. Destroyer armor. As the light pillar dispersed, a giant humanoid weapon, over 3 meters tall, stood silently in the middle of the street. Its faceplate could open and close, revealing a hollow core inside, emitting destructive energy fluctuations. Destroyer. It seems my impatient brother couldn't wait any longer. Leon shrugged, a faint smile on his face. He knew that Loki had sent Asgard's ultimate weapon to clear all obstacles. And this was the good show he had been eagerly anticipating. On the town's streets, people screamed in terror, scattering and fleeing. The destroyer advanced slowly with heavy steps. Each step it took left a deep footprint on the road. What is that monster? A police officer trembled, raising his pistol, but fear left him unable to even pull the trigger. Fire! Fire! The police chief's voice roared over the intercom. Bang bang bang. Bullets struck the destroyer, but only sparked a series of flashes, unable to leave even a scratch. The destroyer stopped, its faceplate slowly opening, revealing its internal core. Buzz. A searing beam of energy erupted from the core, instantly engulfing several police cars. Boom. A violent explosion swept through half the street, with flames soaring into the sky. In the restaurant, everyone was stunned by the terrifying scene before them. It's the destroyer. Sif's tone was solemn. Loki is insane. He actually sent this weapon of war to Midgard. We must stop it. Thor roared, turning to rush out. What will you stop it with? Leon's voice was calm, yet it was like a bucket of cold water poured over Thor's head. With your fists. Thor's steps faltered. He looked at the invulnerable monster outside the window, which could destroy half a street with a single blow, and a deep sense of powerlessness welled up in his heart. Yes, without his divine power, without Mjolnir, he was now just a slightly stronger mortal. Wait, that's not right. Shouldn't Leon be the one worried about this kind of thing? Why was he worried? Oh, right, and All-Father Odin. Just then, Sif and the Warriors 3 had already rushed out. For Asgard. They were warriors of Asgard, fearless even when facing the destroyer. Volstagg brandished his great axe, charging first and striking the destroyer's leg with a heavy blow. Clang! With a loud crash, Volstagg only felt his hand go numb from the shock, and there wasn't even a white mark on the destroyer's leg. The destroyer slowly turned, its hollow faceplate aimed at him. Buzz! The energy beam erupted again. Watch out! Fandral was quick, pushing Volstagg aside. The beam grazed past their bodies, leveling a building behind them. Hogun and Sif also launched attacks simultaneously, but their weapons similarly failed to cause any damage to the destroyer. The four most elite warriors of Asgard, in front of this metal giant, were like four children circling an elephant, both comical and tragic. In the restaurant, Jane and Daisy were already pale with fright, hiding under the table. Professor Eric, however, stared intently at the battle outside the window, his eyes filled with bewilderment. Thor watched his companions being struck down one by one, watching them fight fearlessly to protect this town. His heart was undergoing torment. Anger, powerlessness, regret, self-reproach. All these emotions intertwined, like a knife, repeatedly cutting at his soul. It's all my fault, he muttered. If I were still in Asgard, none of this would be happening. He looked at Jane and the mortals who were dragged into danger because of him, as well as the rampaging destroyer outside the window. Finally, he took a deep breath, a hint of determination flashing in his eyes. He turned and strode out of the restaurant. Thor! Don't go! Jane screamed in terror. But Thor didn't look back. He walked to the center of the street, spread his arms, and stood in front of the destroyer. Loki! He looked up and shouted loudly at the empty sky, knowing that Loki must be watching. All of this is my fault. It has nothing to do with these mortals. The one you should be dealing with is me and my brother. Leave them alone. His voice was faint amidst the explosions and screams, yet firm. The destroyer stopped, its faceplate slowly turning towards the unarmed Thor. Buzz! The light from the energy core glowed again. No! Jane let out a desperate scream. Just as the destroyer's energy beam was about to erupt, a hand gently pressed against its faceplate. It was Leon. He had appeared in front of the destroyer at some unknown point. He still had that lazy demeanor, even letting out a yawn. The destroyer is a very special weapon. The power it exerts varies depending on who is wielding it. If Odin were using it, given Leon's current strength, it would be impossible to defeat. But with Loki using it, that was a different story. My foolish younger brother, you should just stick to being a strategist. Loki, Leon said, looking at the destroyer and shaking his head. You are too weak, truly. He gently raised his right fist, and golden light gathered in it. Seeing this posture, Thor seemed to recall some unpleasant memories. It was with such a simple, plain punch that Leon had once knocked him down. Bang! A loud bang resonated. An impact instantly spread, shattering the glass of surrounding buildings. This seemingly ordinary punch contained immense power. The destroyer armor, from head to toe, cracked inch by inch with that punch. Crack! Crack! Dense cracks instantly covered its entire body. Then, under the horrified gazes of everyone, this ultimate weapon from Asgard, with a crash, shattered into a pile of parts on the ground. The town suddenly fell silent, leaving only the sound of the wind blowing. On the streets of the small town, time seemed to freeze. The ultimate weapon that had just given the Warriors 3 and Valkyrie Sif a hard time was now a pile of metal parts, lying quietly on the ground. The howling wind had stopped at some point, leaving only silence and the sound of everyone's breathing. Thor stood rooted to the spot, his arms still partly open in the posture he had assumed to welcome death, his face, once resolute and tragic, now filled with bewilderment. What had he just experienced? In his imagination, this was a tragic drama where he would willingly sacrifice himself to protect mortals. He had been ready to use his own death to awaken his father's mercy and end Loki's madness. He had even thought about how his epitaph in Valhalla should be written. And the result? The script reached its climax, and just as he, the hero, finished his lines and prepared to bravely face death, someone suddenly jumped out of the audience and punched the villain to death. That was the Destroyer. This was the war machine that Father Odin used to guard the treasury, a machine even the frost giants feared. You're telling me it's just gone? Destroyed by a casual punch from his elder brother, who had been lazy for thousands of years and couldn't even be bothered to attend royal court meetings. Thor felt his worldview shaken once again. Leon is a prince of Asgard, so what am I? He looked down at his hands, then up at the figure not far away. A sense of frustration welled up in his heart again. Is the gap really that big? Sif and the Warriors 3 were in no better state than Thor. They struggled to their feet, disregarding their injuries, their eyes fixed on the pile of scrap metal and Leon's figure. As Asgardian warriors, they knew the terror of the Destroyer better than anyone. In the battle just now, they had fought with all their might, even prepared to sacrifice themselves, yet they couldn't even leave a scratch on it. That was true despair, and the Destroyer was truly powerful. Even Thor, before his power disappeared, couldn't defeat it. However, this power was so vulnerable in front of Your Highness Leon. This made them even more frustrated. Perhaps, this is the gap between them and Your Highness Leon. Volstagg rubbed his eyes hard, unable to believe what he saw. Fandrel's mouth twitched, his longsword hanging limply. Hogun silently put away his meteor hammer. He knew that as long as the first prince was there, everything could be resolved. Sif's eyes were the most complex. She looked at Leon, her eyes filled only with shock and incomprehension. Of course, there was also no less admiration. Is this the sun god of Asgard? Every Asgardian had heard of Leon's legend. She used to wonder why Leon, who had made the 9 realms tremble 2,000 years ago, had then become silent for a millennium. Now she understood, he wasn't dormant, he simply disdained to act. But one question made her even more curious. Why did Your Highness Leon, powerful as he was, spend 2,000 years searching for that titan in the universe? And why could he never find him? She knew this titan, the current overlord of the universe, Thanos. Sif's eyes suddenly widened, she felt she was touching the truth. Could it be that Your Highness Leon had always wanted to lead Asgard to a broader universe? Meanwhile, in the diner, Jane, Daisy, and Professor Eric were dumbfounded. Through the broken window, they looked at the mythical scene outside, feeling their scientific understanding being trampled upon. Should I call NASA? Daisy muttered to herself, her phone still in video recording mode, but she was too shocked to press the record button. Should I tell them we might have discovered a whole new humanoid species? Jane stared intently at Leon, her eyes gradually becoming fervent. But it wasn't the fanaticism of a fan seeing an idol, but the fervor of a scientist encountering an unknown field. Energy. Immeasurable energy. His punch just now had no fancy special effects, no thunder and lightning, only power, power, and more power. How was that power generated? And how was it transmitted? This completely defied the laws of physics she knew. Her brain was working at lightning speed, countless formulas and theories flashed through her mind, but she couldn't find anything to explain what was happening before her eyes. As for Professor Eric, this avid enthusiast of Norse mythology was now trembling with excitement. He clutched the table, his lips quivering, his eyes filled with tears. A miracle. This is a true miracle. Odin above, what have I seen? Gods. They truly exist. Asgard, heavenly palace. Loki witnessed everything that happened in Midgard. When he saw the Destroyer shattered into pieces by Leon's punch, the smugness and confidence on his face instantly froze. No. Impossible. He whispered in disbelief, his body uncontrollably stepping back, hitting the armrest of the throne. The Destroyer, that was his last trump card, the weapon he intended to use to eliminate Leon and Thor, and even all obstacles, to consolidate his kingship. He had even thought about how he, as a grieving brother and the new king, would announce this unfortunate news to all of Asgard after the Destroyer killed Leon and Thor. But now, all his plans and schemes had been ruined by his elder brother. One punch. Just one punch. How did Leon do it? Loki felt like a joker, only capable of petty schemes, but in front of people like Father and Leon, all schemes were futile. Leon, how strong was he? Had he been dormant for the past 1,000 years, or had he been feigning? Countless thoughts flashed through Loki's mind, but they all ultimately converged into one conclusion. It seemed he had provoked the elder brother who had given him psychological shadow since childhood. In the small town of New Mexico, Leon slowly withdrew his fist. He shook his head. Loki was still too weak, the destroyer was simply wasted in his hands. He turned around and looked at his dazed younger brother, sighing helplessly. All right, the farce is over. As his voice fell, the silence was broken. He slowly walked in front of Thor, his pupils showing a hint of laziness and disdain. He put away his playful attitude and adopted the tone of a good elder brother. He knew that sometimes, it was necessary to give his subordinates a little sweetness to deepen his image. Thor. Leon shook his head, reached out, and patted Thor's stiff shoulder, brushing off the dust. You always like to mess things up so much. Look at you, look at this place, all to prove your pathetic heroism, you almost took down the entire town. Thor's lips moved, but he couldn't utter a single word. What could he say? Argue? With what? With his heroic feat of almost being blown to smithereens by a single blast just now. All right, stop making that face like the world has abandoned you. Leon pursed his lips, he couldn't stand Thor's aggrieved look. He turned, ignoring Sif and the others, and walked directly towards the destroyer's wreckage. Loki is such a prodigal son. Such good Uru metal, just wasted like that. Leon shook his head again, casually raising his hand towards the pile of scrap metal. To everyone's astonished gazes, the scattered metal parts seemed to respond to an invisible summons, slowly floating up, then transforming into streams of light that flew into Leon's palm, finally disappearing. This was a type of magic from Asgard, a very unique magic that allowed him to store things easily. This was also why he could conjure many things. What? You ask me why Loki can't. What do you think? Things from Asgard, naturally, should be handled by Asgard, he said indifferently, as if merely stating a fact. Thor, Sif, and the warriors three were all stunned. What was that? Space magic. When did your highness Leon even master such intricate magic? Leon ignored their shock. He turned and walked back in front of Thor, gazing at him calmly. My brother, now, do you still have anything to say? Thor's face flushed. He looked at Leon, and finally asked the biggest confusion in his heart. Leon, I just want to be a great warrior, to be a general who can fight alongside you. I just want to prove myself. Thor sighed. He only wanted to be the future king's most reliable arm, not a troublesome burden. He never coveted the throne, because he knew that Leon was the born king, and he only wanted to be the sharpest sword in the king's hand. Hearing this, Leon finally revealed a relieved smile. How should he describe this brother? Aside from being a bit reckless, everything else was good. He listened to advice, didn't talk back, just wasn't very bright. Seeing Thor like this, Leon thought of Loki again. It seemed he really had to make time to go back and educate his third brother. Other people's three brothers usually had the third brother being reckless, wanting to stab people with 1,000 transparent holes. Why was his third brother always thinking about being a traitor? He really couldn't do anything with them. A general. No, Thor, a qualified general first needs to learn not how to fight, but why to fight. If you can't even control your own power, can't even calm your own emotions, then how can you protect? How can you fight alongside? He lowered his hand, his tone becoming serious, just like their father's tone when lecturing the three brothers. Thor, my dear brother. Don't you understand yet? Father banished you to Midgard not to have you arm wrestle and be a hero here. He wants you to learn to use this. Leon pointed to his own temple, continuing his earnest instruction. He wants you to use your brain to think about problems, not just rely on your brute strength forever. A boor who doesn't understand reverence, doesn't understand responsibility, and only knows how to use violence to display glory, will never become a qualified general. In fact, he won't even be a qualified warrior. Leon's words were direct and shattered Thor's deepest pride and unwillingness. Thor opened his mouth but found himself unable to refute. Because he knew that everything Leon said was correct. All right, lecture time is over. Leon's tone became relaxed again. He glanced at the large crater in the distance, and the lonely hammer in its center. Do you see it, Thor? That is the final test Father left for you. Leon's gaze turned to Thor, becoming profound. That is not just a weapon, Thor. That represents responsibility, it represents protection, it represents whether you are worthy. He patted Thor's shoulder, speaking in a deep tone. Tell me, do you want your hammer back? Thor suddenly looked up, hope rekindled in his eyes. Yes. Then prove it to me, prove it to Father, and prove it to yourself. Leon nodded with satisfaction, continuing. To put it simply, you need to prove that you have understood what true Thor's power is. Only then will you be worthy to wield that hammer. He turned his head, looking at Jane Foster and her two companions, who were carefully walking out of the diner. Your lesson has just begun, Leon said, pointing to the three. And they are your first examiners. Thor followed Leon's gaze, his expression becoming complex. He looked at Jane Foster's curious eyes, at Daisy's and Selvig's excited faces. Although he really didn't want to say those words, he still wanted to complain. If he had to say examiners, why would it be Jane and them? They were just mortals with short lives, who could even be killed by an ordinary dust storm. He had thought that Leon would personally give him lessons. A sense of absurdity welled up in Thor's heart. He was a prince of Asgard, a future general. He had campaigned across countless stars, slain countless giant beasts. Within the 9 realms, who hadn't heard of thunder god Thor's renown? And now, his elder brother was telling him that his eligibility to regain Thor's power needed to be judged by a few mortals. This was even more outrageous than Loki's pranks. However, seeing Leon's calm eyes, Thor knew that Leon never joked, especially about such matters. Every word he spoke carried an undeniable weight. Leon watched the changes in Thor's expression. His heart was unperturbed, and he even found it a little amusing. He certainly knew what Thor was thinking, and he understood it well. This was the arrogance stemming from divine blood, deeply ingrained even after being stripped of his divine power. Odin's teaching method was too gentle, always trying to enlighten this son, whose muscles were more developed than his brain, with grand principles, resulting in a boor who only knew how to solve problems with a hammer. It seemed that he, as the elder brother, still had to give him a more profound practical lesson. What? Feeling wronged? Leon's voice rang out again, still in that lazy tone, yet it made Thor's body involuntarily tense. Do you feel that learning from mortals is an insult to your divine status? Thor opened his mouth but found himself unable to refute. Because Leon had spoken his inner thoughts. Leon chuckled softly, shaking his head. He no longer looked at Thor, but walked slowly towards Jane Foster and her two companions. His steps were not fast, each one appearing calm and unhurried. The golden sunlight shone on him, stretching his shadow long, like a god walking among humans. Dr. Jane Foster's heart was pounding. The man in front of her was far more impactful than Thor. Thor's power was outwardly expressed, well, even though Thor looked like a simpleton. Perhaps he should play Ah Gone in Forrest Gump, there would be no sense of incongruity. None of that was the point was this man, who called himself Leon, his power was restrained, unfathomable. He just stood there, as if he were the center of the entire world, and even the light seemed to bend for him. She frowned tightly, trying to find a reasonable explanation for everything before her. But in the end, all theories crumbled before those golden eyes. What exactly is this? Dr. Foster. Leon stopped in front of her, a gentle smile on his face. My brother will be troubling you all for a while. I hope you'll take care of him. Ah. Oh, no trouble at all. Jane replied incoherently, feeling her cheeks flush. Daisy elbowed her hard from the side, muttering softly, Hey, Jane, snap out of it. You're practically drooling. Leon's gaze shifted to Daisy, and the smile at the corner of his mouth deepened. Miss Lewis, your stun gun is quite unique, but next time, I suggest you get one with more power. My brother is quite resilient, that model of yours might only be good for a light massage. Daisy was a bit embarrassed, she subconsciously clutched her backpack, where her precious self-defense item was stored. How did this guy know? Does he have X-ray vision? Finally, Leon looked at Professor Eric. Professor, I know you have a deep understanding of Norse mythology. Leon's tone remained gentle. But the knowledge in books is, after all, your imagination. The true Asgard is far more complex and dangerous than you imagine. He pointedly glanced at Thor in the distance. In your words, sometimes the whims of gods can bring you catastrophic disasters. So, keep my brother in line, don't let him cause any more trouble. It's good for you, and for him. Professor Eric nodded solemnly. He heard a hint of warning in the man's words. He seemed to be telling them in this way that Thor's future was closely linked to them. After explaining all this, Leon turned back to his brother, who was still in self-doubt. Thor, his voice returned to normal. Your course content is very simple. He pointed to the three bewildered individuals. Protect them, understand them, and learn to think like a mortal. When you truly understand what it means to guard, not to conquer, what it means to be responsible, not to seek glory, you will naturally be able to wield that hammer again. After speaking, Leon ignored everyone. He looked up at the sky, seemingly finding the sunlight here quite pleasant, and then snapped his fingers. A lounge chair, along with an ice bucket full of alien grapes, appeared out of thin air on the open ground. Leon slowly walked over, casually lay down, and picked up a bunch of grapes to toss into his mouth. All right, you can begin. He lazily waved his hand. Don't disturb my sleep. Everyone. Sif and the warriors' three's mouths twitched. They had traveled thousands of miles, risking being discovered by Loki, to come to Midgard, only to watch the first prince sunbathe here. Jane, Daisy, and Eric felt their brains weren't enough. He threw his brother to them as a student, and then he himself slept beside them. Is this really the style of the divine realm? Well, that's truly unconventional. Thor's face turned green and then white. He glanced at Leon, who was leisurely lying down, feeling exhausted. He then looked at his hammer, still stuck in the crater in the distance, as if mocking him. Finally, he took a deep breath, as if making a major decision. He walked up to Jane, forcing out an expression of awkwardness and humility. Jane. His voice was deep. Excuse me, do you still need an assistant here? The kind who can fix tractors and also arm wrestle. Asgard, deep within the palace. Odin, through the connection of the world tree, saw everything happening in Midgard. When he saw Leon shatter the destroyer with a single punch, satisfaction and pride flashed in his eyes. And when he saw Leon humiliatingly discipline Thor, he couldn't help but show a wry smile. This son of his was truly too much like his younger self. Equally powerful, equally arrogant, and equally fond of solving problems in his own way. Frigga. He whispered to the empty bedchamber. Perhaps our decision back then was correct. Leon, he truly is a born king. His gaze became profound, with anticipation in his eyes. I hope he can guide Thor onto the right path. The future of Asgard cannot rely on just one king. Meanwhile, in the throne room, Loki's face was as grim as if he were about to pick cotton. The casket of ancient winters before him emitted bone-chilling cold, but it could not cool the rage within him. Leon. It's Leon again. Why does he always appear at the most crucial moment and easily shatter his plans? Loki's fingernails dug deep into the armrest of the throne. He had originally thought that as long as Thor was eliminated, the throne would be within reach. But now he realized that his greatest enemy was never the simple-minded Thor, but the seemingly detached, yet unfathomable Leon. Although the throne rightfully belonged to Leon, Loki was unwilling. He even began to suspect whether Leon's millennia of idleness were just a disguise. A facade used to deceive everyone. No. Loki suddenly stood up. I cannot just sit here and wait to die. His eyes once again became frantic. Since conventional methods won't work against you, Leon, then don't blame me for using some unconventional means. He turned and strode towards the deepest part of the vault, where some forbidden items were stored. The small town in New Mexico, after a period of unrest, once again returned to peace. SHIELD's follow-up forces, under Coulson's command, quietly sealed off the scene, publicly claiming that the military was conducting secret exercises for new weapons. Although the frightened townspeople harbored doubts, upon seeing a few banknotes bearing the president's likeness, they wisely chose to keep quiet. Leon still lay in his lounge chair, enjoying the sun of Earth, as if everything around him had nothing to do with him. Thor, meanwhile, began his cultivation on Earth. He studied astrophysics with Jane, though he spent most of the time dozing off. He helped Daisy move equipment, though he almost crushed expensive instruments several times. He also went to bars with Professor Eric, trying to understand human socialization through Asgardian drinking culture. He was no longer the high and mighty Thor, but a clumsy yet diligently learning mortal. Sif and the Warriors 3 became his bodyguards and roommates. They rented an abandoned warehouse in the town, and every day, besides supervising Thor's learning progress, they tried to replicate Asgardian barbecue using Earth's ingredients. Everything, it seemed, was developing in a good direction. Until a few nights later. Leon was napping in his lounge chair, golden divine power slowly flowing around him, shimmering with the moonlight. Suddenly, he opened his eyes. His pupils reflected a firelight rapidly falling towards Earth. Has it finally arrived? Leon smiled slightly. He slowly sat up and picked up the last bunch of grapes from the ice bucket beside him. Loki, you're being disobedient again. Thanks for watching.